would like to call the April 26, 17 Reconfiguration 2.0 full committee meeting to order. Do I have to read the mission statement?
Roll call.
Roll call, please.
All right. Ronnie?
Yes.
Alexander?
Yes.
Julie?
Yeah.
Ira?
Here.
Megan? Jory?
Here.
Kenneth?
Here.
Rocky?
Here.
Melissa?
Here.
Dan James? Hart?
Yep.
Ivan?
Here.
Raphael? Mark?
Yes.
Lawrence?
Yep.
Carol? Lazarus? Darren?
Yes.
Jeff? Ian?
Here.
Dan?
Here.
Davis?
Here.
Helen?
Here.
Ronald? Mark Ming? Mark Fry? Carol Down? Brian? Rick?
Yes.
Dan?
Here.
Lori?
Here.
Becky?
Yeah.
Quorum?
Yay, we have a quorum. Woohoo. Can I get an approval for this agenda?
Nope.
I moved to.
I wasn't here, so I shouldn't be on
The agenda?
No,
the
next.
agenda. Oh, I'm, let's get that.
You're so excited.
I moved to approve the agenda as is.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. Approval of minutes. I think Darren might have an issue.
I wasn't here, so I should be on the minutes.
Are you sure?
I was,
We'll amend that accordingly.
Okay.
As amended.
Can I get a
I don't
motion
think
to
I
approve the
responded.
minutes?
I move we approve
With
the minutes
that
as amended.
revision.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
All righty. Public comment.
Public is actually approving.
We're good. I have no comments, so moving on to presentations, reports, and discussions. We're gonna start with acuity. I hope I said correctly. We've been working on it, I promise.
Perfect.
And then we are going to move on to Nagel and Gilbane's first round. What I would like to ask everyone is that we let our presenters present without interruption. If you have any questions, write them down. They might get answered in the course of the presentation. And just to respect their time and the integrity of the presentation. So with that,
Good, thank you. So we completed the survey. We, since our last presentation, we did the final set of data and developed a report, which I believe most of, if not all of you have seen. Tonight I'm going to go through the executive summary and kind of the high-level findings. And again, when I'm done, if there are any questions, we can dive deeper into the details of the analysis. Just again, a quick recap. We received completed survey responses from nearly 450 households across the district. Most of them came via online, the online survey, and a little over 100 each came from mail and phone interviews. We weighted the data to reflect census targets for the district in terms of where people live in the district, their age, their gender, their race and ethnicity. We also made sure that our respondents' self-reported support or opposition to the 2016 referendum was in line with the actual vote outcome, so that not just demographically, but in terms of their opinions about the 2016 referendum, more skewed more heavily to supporters or opponents of the referendum. Again, just as a note, it was fairly easy to get responses from people who have children in the schools, have preschool-age children, or older residents who tend to participate in surveys more than not. And we had an underrepresentation, therefore, of people who I would describe as empty nesters and younger single people or younger people without children. And that's why weighting the data was important to make sure that we had a representative view across the entire district. There are more detailed maps in the survey, but using census tracts to make sure that our distribution reflects the population. These are the regions that we use in the analysis based on how we grouped So again, as far as the overall findings are concerned, there were a number of areas where we found residents by and large pretty much agreed on some key issues with regard to configuration strategies and their goals. One of the main things that came out was that consistency in curriculum and quality of education across all of the District 112 schools was especially important to residents. When we asked them to rank these 4 items in terms of the first, second, third, or fourth priority, almost half said the number 1 priority was consistency in curriculum, and the next highest item got about half as many people saying that was most important. So from that question, that finding came through loud and clear. We also asked about the importance of different options and goals for any reconfiguration plan. And again, across this long list, the number 1 item that was most important up at the top was, again, a consistent curriculum among all schools. Second to that was class size. And you can see from the first couple of bars that a majority of people think that keeping class sizes to under 20 students is extremely or very important. That's the third line there. And not surprisingly, an even higher proportion think that keeping it under 25 students is even more important, the second bar there. We asked that as a split halves. So every respondent heard one or the other. Because we asked them, how do you feel about 20? Well, not how do you feel about 25? Their answer to the second question would depend on their answer to the first. So in terms of agreement across almost all of the residents that we spoke with, consistency and class size are the 2 biggest objectives in this. And then when we ask them which one is most important, those 2 items dominate. Regardless of whether they got the 20-student option or the 25-student option. A third said consistency is most important, just about as many, between 29 and 34%, said class size was the most important of those objectives. Everything after that was far lower. Full day kindergarten ranked 3rd across those 3. So all of these things are important to a lot of people, but when they're forced to choose one, those were the 3 that rose to the top. We also asked a number of agree and disagree statements, and by and large, residents recognize the need for consolidation at some level. 80%, almost 80%, strongly disagreed or disagreed that the district should keep all 12 middle and elementary schools open. So virtually everybody understands that something has to close within the district. The other item that they clearly agree on is the bottom item, that reconfiguring the schools is needed to ensure the district's finances remain stable. 85% strongly or somewhat agreed that was necessary. Again, not a lot of division on these. We had at least 2/3 agreeing with the fact that they feel that the district and the community team are approaching this in a responsible manner. And likewise, we had about 2/3 disagreeing that the buildings and facilities are in okay shape and just need minor repairs. They understand, for the most part, that it's more than just minor improvements that are needed. When we asked about specific physical improvements to the buildings, at least, again, 2/3 either said that each of these, for the most part, are either extremely or very important. The physical improvements were more important in general than some of the other outcomes that we saw regarding the number of students per grade level per school, and so on. So fire sprinklers, STEM labs, again, this idea of consistency in the amenities and technologies that are available across the schools, making sure everyone is ADA compliant and air conditioning with better ventilation. Again, roughly 2/3 or more said all of those are at least very important. One area where they felt less strong was the need for multi-purpose classrooms. And again, when we asked them which one is most important, Here, in this question, STEM labs came up a little bit higher than providing fire sprinklers across all the schools. The other area of general agreement was that the 4 out of 5 residents understood and support closing one of the 3 middle schools. So again, similar to the previous finding that very few felt that all 12 schools needed to stay open, the vast majority of residents understood that it's not realistic or necessary to keep all 3 middle schools open. And going down to 2 was clearly in their preference. There were, not surprisingly, points of division. While most recognize the need for some school closures, not surprisingly, half feel that it's very or somewhat important to keep their local neighborhood school open, especially their elementary school. They don't want to give up their neighborhood elementary school. Middle schools they feel less strongly about, but just over half said that they wanted to hold on to their local elementary school. A small plurality felt it was more important or were more in favor of addressing the problem more quickly rather than doing it in stages and more incrementally. Again, not a majority, but close to half and about 10% more who preferred doing it in stages. And the remaining 13% really didn't have much data either way. There remains a core group, and we saw this across a number of questions. It's probably 25 to 40% of the residents that we spoke to seem to be more focused on the impact on property taxes than other issues or other benefits that this would bring up. This came up, this is the slide I showed earlier where I told you at the top that consistency and the quality of education was most important. Ranking right in the middle in terms of importance was minimizing the impact on property taxes and the overall cost. Again, 25% said that was most important to them. And then when we asked them in an open-ended question, what's your biggest concern with regard to the school reconfiguration topic in general? A little over a third said their biggest concern was that they were worried about the property tax hit that it would result. And we'll see that come up again when we ask questions about the referenda or the bond options and whether they support or oppose each of those. The concept of pairing elementary schools on a regional basis also had a little bit of division. 61% said they were in favor of it, 39% say they were against it. So you still have a sizable number of people who were not in favor of splitting up the K through 5 curriculum into 2 different schools and pairing those. And then when we asked that, or when we looked at that question by the people who earlier said it's extremely important for me to keep my neighborhood elementary school, they're the group that clearly is most opposed to pairing. And again, the people who said it's extremely important represent about 29% of all the residents. So you have almost a third of the people who say, I want to keep my neighborhood school and I don't want to pair it, for the most part. Everybody else, even though very or somewhat important, they were much more willing to consider the pairing of elementary schools. The other thing we looked at by this question is by which elementary school they consider their neighborhood school. And you can see that most of them fall pretty close to the overall average of 61% support, 39% opposed, but the 2 outliers are Lincoln and Brayside, where a majority are opposed, as opposed to 39% were opposed. Okay, and then we test the willingness to pay questions on one of 3 different bond options. Again, each respondent only heard and responded to one of these 3 options. At the $75 million, $100 million, and $150 million level, we couldn't give them a lot of details because there aren't a lot of details at this point, other than knowing what that amount would be and what the impact would be on the median valued home in the district. And as I mentioned before, there really is not much drop off. There isn't much drop off in the overall support from 75 million at 69% support to 100 million at 66% support. You get fewer strong supporters between those two price points. But the overall level of support doesn't drop much. It drops much more from 100 to 150, where you actually have more strong opponents at the 150 million level than you have strong supporters. And in the report, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because it's laid out in more detail in the report, but we try to show how these, as one moves from left to right, from 75 million to 100 to 150, which groups report lower support as the dollar amount goes up, basically from left to right. And you can see that there are some groups who are relatively flat. For example, on the left side, that bottom heavy black line are residents in the lakefront. They're least supportive at all levels, and they're pretty consistent at that level of support. You still get a majority of them, but they really don't change very much. Whereas the folks, and these aren't always linear because the sample sizes get smaller, but you can see, for example, in the green, the South Highland Park residents, they support the $75 million option at 72%, and then it drops to 63% for 162% for 150. So you can see, and again, it's in more detail in the report, how different segments of the district respond differently to the different dollar amounts. I think the one on the left here is important. For those who currently have children in District 112 schools, the black line represents relatively strong support across all three levels. There's a little drop off from 100 to 150, but it's still fairly high support. Likewise, pretty consistently high support among those with preschool children. But among those who have no children in the household, they're relatively supportive at the lower amount, but when it gets to 150, it drops considerably. The other interesting thing I thought was by gender. Women tended to support the two lower amounts, but when it got to 150, that support went south. No real surprises on the left by how they reported, or what they reported as feeling about the 2016 referendum. Those who said they supported it maintain a high level of support across all 3 points. The interesting thing is, among those who opposed the 2016 referendum, you do have a majority of them supporting the 75 and $100 million options, but not 150. And then the final thing on the right, these were those 4 goals. And looking at those who said each one was their #1 priority, the consistency in schools, the green line at the top, if it's going to mean consistency in their schools, they're going to support it at any level. If it's going to mean, if my main concern, however, is the overall cost and the tax impact, I'm going to support it far less than anybody else, almost to the point of not supporting it at all at 150 million. Only 12% of the people who said they were most concerned about the property tax impact would support a $150 million bond option. I mentioned it before, roughly 25 to 40% of the survey respondents seem to be especially focused on property taxes. For those who opposed any of these 3 options, when we asked in an open-ended question, why do you oppose it? Why would you not support it? Not surprisingly, their biggest response is, it's too much of a tax increase. I don't want to pay that much more. And then second was somewhat related, find other ways to cut. Cut your spending before you raise my taxes more. So they're all related. In terms of the reasons for supporting it, among those who supported the option that they heard, they clearly feel that the tax increase is worth it, given the importance of maintaining and improving the quality of schools, the consistency of schools. Somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5 recognize that improvements are needed, and that's why they support it. And then the important thing is, in the middle where it says supported with some concerns, especially at the higher levels, 100 and 150, there was a fair number of people who said, I support it as long as. So I'll support this if you can make the case that this is going to happen, that the outcomes are going to be realized, that it's going to be worth my taxes going up by that amount, that you're going to do everything you can to cut wasted spending as well to fix your finances. So while at some of those levels, especially at 75 and 100, especially at 100, there was strong support, there is a fairly sizable group of supporters who say, I'll support it, but you gotta convince me more that these other outcomes are going to be realized. Any questions? Any surprises? Yes.
Okay, I have, I guess, a question and a comment. When you talk about stages, okay, like doing the work in stages, does that, I guess I'm not sure, does that mean that the referendum would pass, that the work will be done, or you pass referendums in stages, like you pass 25, 25, 25, or?
No, the way the question read, and it was read in different order. On the left side, the option A read, any approved reconfiguration should be implemented quickly. This would avoid any prolonged disruptions and would also avoid school reassignments and additional costs in the future. However, it would mean more significant changes to students in the schools in the short term. Side B says, any approved reconfiguration plan should be done in stages. This would allow the district to assess each stage of the plan and would minimize the immediate impact on students and schools. However, it would extend the timing of the school closure and reassignments and result in higher costs in the long run. So we gave, here's the reason, here's the positive for this option, and here's the negative for this option, and then the same positive and negative for the other option. So it wasn't staging the referendum. It
Okay.
was staging the execution of the plan.
Okay, that clears up. And then just my other comment is, when you talk about, when you answer about, came down on the lowest 3 sizes per grade, 3 sections per grade, classes per grade. Was there anything in there about that's the way 21st century learning is, that having collaborative learning and having more teachers in the grade is better? I'm not sure that was understood at any point.
I would agree with you. And again, in a survey, we can't, we don't want to say, well, here's the reason for it without
Right,
giving the reason
okay.
against it. So we don't want to slant the phrasing of the question, but at the same time, we don't want to give them so much information that they kind of glaze over. So the wording that you see here is really just to explain what this means. It means a critical number of students or critical number of classes per grade level per school. And it comes up very low, and we got to have most of our people in the middle. Some are not very important, which when I see results like this, suggests to me that people really don't understand it fully, so they don't go to the extremes more. So if this is important, and if from the focus groups, from the forums, this is getting traction in the discussions, as you can explain it a little bit more and people respond more favorably, it would clearly need to be something that would have to be explained, because I don't think people, A, understand it, or B, understand why it's a benefit and why it's important. Yes?
Going back to the number of people that actually took the survey, those that took it online, were these, I received a postcard with a code on it. Is that different from anybody that was invited to just come and randomly take it, so we could have got people from outside the district, inside the district?
Well, there were 2 surveys that were done. What I presented tonight, the 448 respondents,
Right.
were the ones who received something in the mail, either a postcard or a questionnaire.
Okay.
Or were called.
Not the survey.
Separate, and after the survey was the public survey.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
And the results of the public survey are included side by side with the results from this survey in the appendix. And you can see there are some areas where they line up, but the public survey is overwhelmingly parents with District 112 students. So I would call the public survey more of a parents survey, and this is more of a community survey. Yes.
I had 2 questions. On slide 2, I think it was, you were talking about oldest adults, and then you said empty nesters. I think, respondents, yeah, and the second up from the bottom, it said highest survey came from oldest adults, and then it said something, conversely, non-respondents can be empty nesters. What's the difference between an oldest adult and an empty nester?
It's my unclear shorthand. Oldest adults generally mean people who are 65 and older. And empty nesters probably in their late 40s, 50s. Kids are off out of college.
Okay, and awesome. And then my next question was, on the slide where it says to keep all 12 schools open, just out of curiosity, because all the other ones where it was like negative, you had it in red, but in this one, the strongly disagree is in green. And I felt like when you visually look at it, like disagree in my head should be red, and then the other colors should be, do you know what I'm saying? Like I felt like the colors were flip-flopped.
They're different for a reason, because
Okay.
generally on the support or opposed question,
Yeah.
important, non-important question, a green means pro schools.
Yeah.
Here, you'll notice that two of the items, District 112 should keep all schools open. And the second one, the facilities are in relatively good shape, they only need minor repairs.
Right.
Those are kind of counter arguments to everything else that this effort is trying to emphasize. Whereas the bottom ones are reflecting what this effort
Okay.
is emphasizing. We did that intentionally because
Got it,
we said,
okay.
well, we're only interested in if you agree with what the 2.0 configuration team is pursuing. Then they're going to say, well, this is slanted, you're only testing.
Okay, I get it now that you explained it. I just was kind of like, wait a second.
So in this case, agreeing with some statements, support your position.
Okay.
Disagreeing with other statements, support your position.
Got it.
So
Okay, makes sense.
that's our weird logic for the colors, yes.
Okay,
There
thank
was-
you. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you?
I
Sorry.
was going this way.
There was a slide with the open-ended questions, and the first response on that, I just wanted to get some clarity.
This one?
It was the second one, sorry. Concerns about consolidation, concentration of students. I realize that you're sort of summarizing what came back to you, but concerns about consolidation and, what does that mean? What are you summarizing here? Yeah.
The three things, the top 3 things that comprise that 53%. I want something that's close to home, where my kids can walk to school, and I want limited busing. That was the first. Second was, I'm concerned about class sizes being too large. And third was, I don't want a mega/single middle school
Right.
like this.
Thank you.
So there were other things that comprised that 53%, but those 3 items were the biggest.
It's helpful, thank you.
Yes.
She's next.
All right. Is there anything, so you'll have to refresh my recollection, in the survey that would have, even if it hasn't been highlighted here, would give you any data regarding where assets through D112 are more favored, and by that I mean elementary school or middle school, because I think that would be helpful to know if they're feeling, we know the schools need upgrading. Is there any information you have that would tell you if they're thinking more about the elementary school or the middle school?
We didn't ask.
Or the significance for education
In terms
thereof?
of improvements to the schools, you said upgrades to the schools.
Yes, when they talked about, well, so they're talking about, I get the feeling everything should be equal. We should all be equal, our curriculum should be equal, we should have ABA, we should have this and that. But is there anything in there, and wouldn't it be worthwhile for a reconfiguration team like ours, who are likely to have limited resources? So rather than deciding our own opinions on where those
Right.
resources should go.
So we didn't test that specifically, but we did ask questions in here about, are there are there schools, is there any school, elementary or middle school, that you are especially interested in wanting to keep open?
Keep open.
And if so, why? And we don't have a lot of cases because it's very fragmented by so many schools.
No, that isn't the question anyway.
Okay, well, that's the closest we
Okay,
can
so I would recommend somewhere along the way, maybe as you do forums or whatever, we're going to have to challenge ourselves to where we want to make the biggest difference educationally, where we really need to be most forward-looking. Is that, and they're different. I think, I'm not an educator, but I would think they're different. The other question, I want to know, maybe Mark can answer this. If we were to feel that our configurations had us push into the dollar amounts that are looking like they're losing support, is there a hardship case that could be made for a small percentage? In other words, I'm sure a lot of people don't want their property tax increased, but maybe there are a certain amount of people who really will be putting in a terrible position when their property taxes are increased. Is there ever a hardship? Don't know? Has anybody ever heard of a hardship case?
I have not.
I've heard of it.
So maybe if people realized, if such a thing existed, and if we could show that respect, and maybe they wouldn't even know that they are or aren't, but that respect for their circumstance, it might be something to explore. Not respect, but I think, I don't know, but I do wonder if there's such a thing, and I doubt as many people who think they can't afford it would be eligible for that hardship. But it's just something I'd like to know the answer to. Probably not, but I wonder if there is.
I've never seen it, Helen.
When,
In all my years of dealing with this stuff, I've never seen anything on hardship on property taxes.
Well, you've never asked for one, but has it
I
happened
know there
anywhere
is
in
for
the
senior
state?
citizens.
What?
I know there is for senior citizens,
Hardship or just an exemption?
an exemption.
Okay, that exemption is about probably $400 here.
Well, there's also
Cover
an
those.
income level thing, which you are able to get a benefit if you have it under a certain.
You can have your taxes reduced. All right, that's a question I had. And the last thing I would just like to clarify about empty nester versus senior, because I worked with that transitional age group for many, many, many years. When your kids first are out of school, whether that's 45 or 60, there is some thought to whether you're sticking around. And then after about 65, the only thing that sort of moves you out after that is,
Stairs.
so they would generally deal with the stairs earlier. That's my point. They start choosing housing that they maybe can walk away from easier or whatever. So if you want to try and understand that group that seems to be unsupportive, a lot of it is, I'll bet you, they're weighing where they're going to be in a few years. And many of them will stay as they go look at options, but that's the process they go through.
Melissa?
Yes.
I wanted to ask if there was anything that would give us a little bit more focus on what the intention is of consistency. Like, if that came up as the highest priority, I feel like we don't necessarily have a good definition of what that means. Like consistency across the district, consistency. I know you have supporting statements for quality of schools and education, but what do you think? Is there anything else that would give us some support, or what that means for consistency across the district or consistency in curriculum?
So when we tested consistency in the survey, it was actually a very late addition to the questionnaire that came from the sets of focus groups that we had just done,
Right.
like the week before.
Yeah, it came up a lot in the focus
It
groups.
came up there.
Uh-huh.
So we intentionally put a couple of questions in there to test consistency, but we didn't do it in a way to ask people, what do you mean? So consistency is important to you. Tell me what that means.
Right.
We didn't do that in the survey. But I think if there are subsequent focus groups or forums, those might be really good opportunities.
Yes.
I know in one of the focus groups, the mother's example of consistency was, my third grader doesn't have any homework. I talked to his teacher, and she doesn't give homework, and he's got a friend at another school, and he's swamped at homework, and now I'm worried when they go to middle school, is my child gonna be overwhelmed by not knowing how to handle so much homework? So it was consistency on different levels.
Right.
The learning experience, the curriculum, quality of education.
Right.
It could mean a lot of things.
Well, and for our purposes, I would be more interested in the student experience part. You know, if a parent says, my child only has, 15 kids in their grade, or only has 20 kids in their grade, and this other school has, 50 in their grade, and is my child having the same opportunities? Like that, I would kind of want to find out a little bit more about that.
We do have a lot of open-ended questions that
Yeah.
will suggest all of those different potential meanings of consistency, but we didn't test that specifically. So-
Okay.
Yes?
When we look at the report that was sent out on the 17th, you've got the page about why they're concerned about elementary school closures. And then the following page talks about an number of people who responded in a certain, and why they say that was important, close to home, historic, nice building, et cetera. If you could give us some, a little discussion on how we should use those numbers. How comfortable should we be in utilizing that decision-making process? Because, a small sample, obviously.
Right.
So it's not statistically, I use the word valid, and it's not really the right word. But it's how comfortable are you with us using those numbers?
I would describe it as directional, and it will give you a pretty good sense, but it's not hard data, hard numbers. And what I would look at is at where the reasons are different for different schools. For example, I don't have it on this presentation, but for example, the two schools that people wanted kept open most often were Ravinia followed by Oak Terrace. But they wanted them kept open for totally different reasons. They wanted Ravinia kept open because it's close to their home, because it's a beautiful building, because it could be easily combined by moving Lincoln and or Brayside. There are a number of reasons. Those who didn't want Oak Terrace closed, it was because so much has been improved recently. Why would you close Oak Terrace?
Brand new building, yeah.
Okay, so that's how I would interpret those, to see which ones come up highest in terms of resistance to closure and the difference in the reasons why. And keep it direct.
Let the record show Mark Frow just showed up. No, thanks for coming.
Yes.
Feel free to tell me you can't answer this question.
Start with that.
And I recognize that all school district situations are local and idiosyncratic, but is there anything in the results here that is worth mentioning in terms of comparative with other districts you've worked on, or anything you found particularly surprising that may speak to the nuances of the situation here?
I would say the two things that jumped out at me compared to some of the other district surveys that we've done for schools. One is, despite my earlier comments, the response to this the response was about what we expected, but the level of information was much higher. And that's obviously because a referendum had already been attempted,
Yeah.
which is unique in this situation compared to a lot of the other districts that we do work for. The other thing that surprised me was, and again, this may be because of post effect from the referendum, is that there were a lot of areas of consensus that surprised me. And again, I think a lot of people were comparing these options or these questions relative to the 2016 referendum. So this is a step in the right direction. I'm more likely to agree with this, even though I didn't support that one. So I think it's more contextual relative to the previous referendum.
I appreciate you saying that, and we've lamented the difficulty in communicating in a meaningful way the district situation, but in a sense, the referendum itself has done some significant amount of that work, if I'm hearing you correctly.
The question about reconfiguration being needed to stabilize district finances.
Right.
Virtually everybody understood that and agreed with that. And even though there's this strong core of very anti-tax households out there, even a number of them agree with that statement.
Yeah, thank you, that's great.
Yes.
So how do you reconcile that, where you have 68% agree that the schools need physical improvement, and 58, 57%, 5%, whatever that amount, that percentage saying, we don't want to spend any money.
This is for people who just don't want, they don't want their property taxes going up $1.
But it's almost, I mean, it's very close to the same percentage.
Yeah, and they're not the same people, and there's some overlap. But, I mean, we'll often see in these surveys, yes, the school's important, yes, this is needed, yes, it needs to happen, but I don't want my property taxes going up $1. Cut the waste, cut the unnecessary expenses, operate more efficiently, and then come to me and ask for property tax increase. Yes.
Kind of following up on what Dana said, based on the work you've done in the districts and other referendums you looked at, and like that, is there anything in the results that you've seen here that's particularly concerning for you, that you view as something that we really have to address going forward based on the results that you've seen in the schools?
I don't know that we've gotten to the level of questions yet to give you a good answer on that. We only really asked one question, and it was very broad about a potential referendum. We know a lot about the issues around that, but in terms of going to referendum and what segments you can move, what segments you're going to have no matter what segments you're never going to have, and which arguments resonate more with each of those. We don't have that level of detail within the survey yet. Yes?
Based on your previous remark, do you think it's worthwhile to find out what the awareness is or raise awareness for the fact that BDR1 and BDR2 have already happened, that there have already been budget deficit reduction programs put into place?
We didn't test it in here, but
Right.
certainly for that group who says cut first and then come to
Right.
me for.
Maybe they don't, they don't know
They
that
don't know.
those cuts were already made,
They do not know.
that action has already been taken.
We should, that's got to be part of our mission. Make sure
Okay,
people know.
okay.
Oh, yeah, when you talked about people that you talked about that don't want their property taxes raised, was there any comment or concern because they were just raised because of the high school referendum?
There were a few. I wouldn't say it was an overwhelming number, but there were a few people who say, look, the high school just had a huge property tax increase, and now you're coming on the heels of that with another one that's just too much for us. A few people, but there wasn't an overwhelming amount of people who volunteered that. Now, the people who say, I don't want my property taxes going up at all, and didn't say because of the high school referendum, we don't know that. If this were more of a voter survey, and we were testing arguments for both sides, opponents say this, opponents say that, that would certainly be an argument for the opposition. Opponents are against this because property taxes just went up significantly for the high school just a few years ago, and this is too soon. Significant. You could do it in that setting. But again, this was more just kind of a general community survey of their understanding and their opinions about broader issues.
And I think that's actually a great segue. We will be talking about our next, thank you, Jeff. We will be talking about our next round of community engagements, which are right around the corner later on this evening. But I also know that John's presentation is going to generate probably a lot of questions. So are we good for the surveys? All right. Thank you, Jeff. And I think that worked out really well, that holding the questions in the end.
Is the impolite way of saying, please do answer?
I don't want to be school marmish, but
No, it's true.
I'm a little school marmish.
I think it's.
I think it comes with the territory, right? So I think that comes with the territory.
It's all right. I can hang.
There's another guy.
You sure?
We've got, did you guys need another one back here?
And then
we didn't
get them.
It's making its way over, yeah, but there might not be.
So.
Oh, we
We're
need
short.
2, 3, 4. We're in the abyss. Here.
We want to make sure they're really
6, 7,
cooperative.
got the back.
Here, I'm a mess. I can't do this.
This is a one-sheet handout, and it starts to speak to the process that we're going through based on the 8 models that have been selected. So since the last meeting, we've been coordinating with both the school districts, specifically with Nicholas, with regard to the community engagement schedule that's put in place to make sure that that work coincides, coordinates with the work that we're doing. We've also worked with Gil Bain as far as the timing and putting together the estimates and that sort of thing. So on page 1, it's a summary of the 8 models that have been selected. The top half of the page deals with 4 models, and then the bottom half deals with the other 4. What we did, just as a way of getting an understanding of the scope of work that we have to do, is we identified a type for each school in each model so that we knew where there was overlap and we could identify how many unique school types we have to make up the 8 models. So using Brayside as an example on the top, you can see in Model 2 we've labeled it BR1. That is for a 3-section per grade K-5 school. As you slide over to the right under Model 5, we have a BR2. That's for a K-2 school that has 4 sections per grade. Okay? And then you'll see that sometimes they repeat. And if you drop down to Oak Terrace, you'll see in models 2, 4, and 6, they're all OT1. So this is a way for us to understand the unique models that we have.
I'm going to break my own rule and interrupt. It seems that the schools not used line is
Not right.
incorrect across the board.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out because I know that we're all sort of frantically scrambling to assess this sheet.
Okay.
I think the first one's correct.
Yeah.
Ravinia is listed on almost every.
On almost everyone, right. So, sorry, Don, I'm gonna hand it back to you, but there's a couple of errors on that bottom line.
So maybe that line is wrong, but the rest is correct, right?
I haven't processed it
It's
yet.
worth double checking. So this is
For sure.
information I got in an email that kind of summarized,
Got it.
the meeting that you had. So it's worth double checking to make sure that we got
Sure.
it right. So going through that exercise, on the bottom half of the page, all the way on the right-hand side, there's a summary of the different types. So for example, there are 4 unique Brayside types, 3 unique trail types. The one that we have the most number of types of is Edgewood Middle School. So we have a total of 39 unique school types. And our plan is to actually draw conceptual plans, so communicate on drawings conceptually the improvements that are necessary at each one of these schools, for each one of these types, so that we can give that to Gil Bain, and Gil Bain can then put together cost estimates that are based on this. The approach that we're going to take is, we talked to Gil Bain about this, most of, there are 8 models here. We were expecting 5, maybe. So we've got a little more work to do than we thought that we would. So the approach that we're going to take to make it the most efficient way possible, we're going to tackle, for example, all of the Brayside schools at once. So we're not going to go model by model and kind of figure out the total cost of the model. We're going to tackle a school at a time, do all versions of each school. So we're really not going to know the total price for any of the models until we get near the end of the process. Now that being said, we also know that it's, there's not going to be a lot of time between when we have the final estimates from Gil Bain and the time we have to go out to the community with the prices. And so there's not going to be a lot of time to, question the numbers and vet the numbers. So I haven't talked to John about this yet, but I was thinking about this evening, that it might be a good idea. Once we get a few of the schools done, so what we're going to do is, as we finish the schools, we're going to give them to Gil Bain. So they're working on pricing on some of the schools while we're still working on designing for other schools. Once we get some of the estimates done, I think it would be a good idea if we could meet with some representative group of this group and and just kind of review the estimates that Gilbane has put together on some of those early school models, so that if there are any questions about the approach or anything like that, that we can kind of vet that early in the process. So we're not waiting until the very end of the process to try to bring up issues that might be universally applied to all of the schools that we're looking at. So that's one idea. The other thing that we could use some help with, and I'm not exactly sure how to approach this, but the Elm Place Indian Trail middle school idea that shows up in one model is an interesting idea, but it can take many different forms, right? So when we're dealing with an Edgewood school that we know we're feeding 11 sections into, we can figure out a program for that and kind of figure out the plan for that. There are a lot of different options for thinking about how you do a middle school on Elm Place, Indian Trail sites combined together. So if there's any information that you can share with us about things that were talked about, ideas that were talked about, that you can share with us and give us some direction on that, that would be helpful. We might also have some ideas. This might be another thing where it would be worthwhile, before we go through the whole process, to have address this issue separately in one of these meetings and talk about what some of those options are, make sure we're heading in the right direction. So I think that's the one that, of all the schools here, that kind of threw us over a little bit. I'll just tell you, the other one that we know is going to be a challenge, and we've mentioned this before, I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone, are the models where we're trying to get a large number of students in middle school at Northwood site together with either early childhood or an elementary school. We know that that's going to be a challenge on that side. We know that it always is. So I think those are some of the highlights. And then on the back side of the page, what we did is we were hopefully optimistic that a number of these schools we have actually drawn before. And so what we did is we went back through every model that we've done in the past to try to find are there any things that we've done in the past that we can just pull from and use in this one. And so this is a summary of it. There's really not much there. But this kind of gives us an idea of, gives us some reference points to look at. But we did go through and look at everything that we've drawn over the course of the last few years now, and see if there's anything there that we could apply to the model that's here. So there isn't a lot there, but I think we certainly have a good understanding of what the issues are now. So we're hoping this will go pretty quickly. And I think, one of the results of this is that, it's going to take a little bit of time to work through this. And so I think that the community engagement meetings now, which I know are another subject, I think the date on that is slid a week or so in order to accommodate this exercise. Any questions? No?
If any curing is used, and other than Oak Terrace, which is relatively new school, would a Revilia or a Braeside or a Indian Trail or whatever, or Sherwood, become less expensive to renovate it if it didn't have as broad a group of students? In other words, you were saying you do a renovation and you plug it into different configurations based on sections probably or size, but the fact that it deals with a smaller breadth, I think.
So what we try to take into account in identifying unique school types is, for example, if you have a Braeside school that is just K-2, serving 8 sections per grade.
Correct.
Okay? We're saying that is exactly the same school as a Braeside school that has 4 sections per grade, that's K-5.
But is it?
Yes.
What about?
The only difference will be the number of toilet rooms, whether it includes kindergarten or whether it's 3-5. How many toilet rooms we need to include in the school. So we've tried to take that into account in assessing the school types.
I thought, like, for instance, if a school didn't have kindergarten in it, it would have less renovation to create the large classroom, or that the IMC would be, tailored more uniquely, or the jungle gym would be tailored. I know that's small.
This is a detailed question that I think we're not going to get into at this
But
time.
you wouldn't say it would favor a less expensive. It has the same amount of students. You don't think the nature of the students being in a smaller breadth of what they need to do
So
would translate.
we know that kindergarten classrooms take up more room than a third grade classroom does. So it's possible, I don't know this yet, but it's possible that you have a K-2 school, 8 sections per grade, which means that you have 8 kindergarten classrooms that all have to have washrooms and they all have to be larger classrooms. And we might find that the school doesn't have enough large classrooms in order to accommodate that, which might lead to that kind of renovation, but we don't know that yet.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I have 2 questions, kind of piggyback on what Helen said. First is, did you take, all-day kindergarten is being taken into consideration, right?
Yes, this assumes all-day kindergarten.
Okay, and then the second is, if you have a separate dual language academy, does that have to be configured differently than a non-dual language?
That's a good question. We assume that there is no difference between a dual language classroom and a monolingual classroom.
Donna, you got the question about Indian Trail and Elm Place.
Yes.
Just, and you might have answered, but what more than saying 11 section 5 through 8 would you need from us to?
We weren't sure if the intention is to try to keep Elm Place and build across the street, if we need more room. We've looked at options in the past where we expand Indian Trail, make it a middle school, keep the play fields on the Indian Trail side, and then park on the Elm Place side, tear down Elm Place. So we're not sure what the intention is. If part of the intention is to preserve Elm Place, for example, that's a critical component in figuring out how you figure this out. So I think we just need to understand better what the ideas were that went into thinking about this model.
Okay, that one was my model, so
Okay.
I can kind of help you with that. The idea was that Indian Trail would house 5, 6, and Elm Place would house 7, 8.
See, and I mentioned that to John, I said we could do this, he said he didn't think that was talked about, but I think that is that is potentially a very interesting model. I think it would be better if there was a way we could link the 2 schools and get some of the common spaces in between, but that's really not going to be possible.
The bridge?
So it won't be necessarily as efficient as it could be otherwise, but I think there's interesting potential with that. And I think that could lead to some questions like, if you have 5, 6, say for example, where Indian Trail is right now, you've got this auditorium.
Right.
On the play side. Do you need to build an auditorium
No,
on
you
the
don't.
5, 6 side?
No,
Kids
no.
can go. So I think, that idea, I think, is a very interesting idea. It could lead to some interesting possibilities that could be fairly cost effective as opposed to saying we're going to tear down a school or, expand one of the schools. So that's very helpful. If there's consensus around that idea, that's very good direction for us.
The only question I had to couple onto that
Yeah.
was that because in that concept, the original idea was to have 5, 6 in one building, 7, 8 in the other. So that kind of addressed some people's social concerns over whether you introduce 5th graders to 7th and 8th graders. When we parallel reason that to Edgewood, where it's one building, is there a way in Edgewood to create kind of a separation between those 2 grade configuration? So like part of Edgewood would be 5, 6, the other part would be 7, 8.
Yes, we did look at plans like that in some of the earlier versions. And one of the ways we were handling that is Edgewood is big enough, you have 2 school entries that face on the Edgewood road. So we had the 5, 6 students entering one and the 7, 8 entering another. Now, once you get out of the school, inside the school, we tried to divide the 4 classrooms as best we could between 5, 6, 7, 8. And there are going to be some areas of overlap inside the school there, but to answer your question, yes, it's possible to do that at Edgewood.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with like common areas being shared at different times. I'm just trying to get the core classes to somewhat emulate 2 separate buildings so that we can say it's similar type of schooling at the Indian Trail site, even though it's a campus versus Edgewood, which is a single school.
Okay, so what you're envisioning is that in the model where you have the 5, 6, 7, 8 Elm Place Indian Trail model, the corresponding Edgewood Middle School would be similarly set up, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right.
That's it.
Because people want consistency
Because people want-
of
So
educational
I'm going to
experience.
chime in because one of the things that we talked about in the exec meeting tonight was how we were going to handle
it's in the same building.
refinements, modifications to these, any additions, and we are going to talk about that later tonight. But I want to time box this a little bit. So does it make sense to bracket this conversation for a little later?
Or get other questions.
And also, and I think there are other questions, and again,
Yeah,
we can
weren't
have this
expect-
conversation in the big group, I think, and then
That's fine. We
relay
weren't
it back.
expecting the answer to this tonight, so I think.
I expect all the answers every night. Question, so there was, in the first joint facilities and education meeting last fall, we broached the topic of where special education programs would go, and I know that Kristen gave you the facilities criteria, but in this approach, which makes a lot of sense to me in terms of sort of treating these drawings in a modular way,
Yes.
would that be something that we would then go back and say, we want to locate these programs at these sites, and then those would be modifications to those drawings?
It's a good question. I talked to John about it, and the approach that we thought we would take would be to figure out the plans and then see if in a given model we have extra room in one school compared to another school, and then maybe suggest a way of fitting in the special education program. Now, it might be that for some reasons that doesn't work well.
Right.
We figure it somehow. We thought that would be a good way to start. It would be the most efficient way to try to fit it into the equation. So to answer your question, our intention is to fit that into the school models
Okay.
as we develop it. We're just not sure where to assign it.
Sure, and just for everyone on the committee, I know that John contacted Dr. Swanson and asked that she put together kind of what the site requirements are for the different programs and sort of what under ideal conditions would support the program. So that'll be coming back to us shortly, and I think that'll be helpful for all of us. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, I just want to make sure we deal with the issue of the auditorium at Northwood's the middle school. I don't know what you guys talked about really before I joined, so I don't know if this has really been dealt with. But a lot of the conversation I've been having with community members suggests that we don't think there really is a need for an auditorium at Northwood, which would save a lot of money as long as you've got the stage thing, and that stage is not used for anything else. So one of the problems with Northwood's stage right now is it's used for like music classes. So if you have rooms that handle all of the other uses for that stage, then having it there isn't a problem. So it's an expensive thing, and it's a lot of design work. So is there a direction that we can give on that sooner rather than later?
I think we had talked about the fact that having a dedicated auditorium is not the most efficient use of space or resources. So someone correct me if I'm wrong.
that's correct.
But I think that where we landed was a mixed use
It was a mixed use
gym
space,
yeah.
auditorium.
but
Is that what you're working with, Don?
So is that direction?
No, it's, this is a question again. I'm
Okay.
sure we can get into it tonight, but it's a good question because it does affect the planning and certainly going to affect the cost. So I think the way to describe it, which is that if you can have a stage in a multi-purpose room or something like that you're not depending on to conduct classes, that's a good way. That's a good way to approach it because frankly, if you add an auditorium to Northwood, then the question becomes, how big is it? And then if it's bigger compared to Edgewood, what do you do at Edgewood to make it Edgewood? So I think it's an important issue. So I think that direction is very helpful.
Yeah, and the other issue with the Northwood facility was that the stage was in the lunchroom, which also serves breakfast, so that it's occupied a chunk of the day with breakfast and lunch, and on top of having the music classes, whatever, so also getting it somehow out of that space into, like you said, a different multi-purpose space, setting that up differently. Like you said, not necessarily an auditorium, but the way it is now.
But not a cafetorium.
Not a cafetorium.
So why is that a problem as long as there's no classes on it?
Because there's not enough room. There's not enough room in the cafeteria, and they're constantly turning it over to set it up for different things while the room is full of people. It's just, there's just too much in the one space.
So these are the kind of qualitative issues that would be helpful for us to know as we're doing this plan. So I think right now we have a list of models, configurations, how many grades, and that's okay. And so we can match that up with the number of rooms in the school. But you're touching on some qualitative issues that will affect how you plan for these things. So I think if, leaving this meeting, I'll try to think of some of the questions that would be critical in that regard that you might want to ask that you might be able to give us some direction on. But I think similarly, if in your discussions and coming up with these models, if you discuss some of these issues that's not reflected just on a spreadsheet, let us know about it.
Well, we do have a recap of our tours, of our building tours, and in that recap, we talk about a lot of the things that we noticed or observed that were or were not working in the different buildings. I don't know if that would be helpful. Like the Northwood issue is on there with the cafeteria.
It'd be more helpful to distill it into a list.
Okay. Okay.
Don, you had mentioned that at some point you would maybe want a group or a subgroup to give you some feedback. When do you think that would need to happen?
I'd like to talk to Bill Bate about it. This would be after we have a first round of estimates back. I don't imagine it will be for a couple of weeks yet.
Okay. I just want to suggest to the group that when the time comes for that, no matter who participates in, that be a notice to open meeting. I think it's
100%.
essential that everything be done in daylight from this point forward.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you want us to just come back to one of your typical meetings here, we can do that.
Okay.
Might be a good time to add additional people like Mary Kavanaugh or Trip Haynes for their couple architects that have been about with 113.
So more specifically, I'm looking at Model 20, and it doesn't seem to align with either our maps or our spreadsheet. So I don't know, the sectioning is not the same.
You want to correct it on this, or, I think it'd be a good idea.
Should we just go through them and then get back to you?
That'd be best. I mean, if there are issues here that you can point out tonight, that would be helpful. But, yes, I think it's going to be good for somebody to double check this against the information that we got, make sure that.
Are you working off of this, or is this for us?
We're going to work off of this.
Okay, great, then we'll double check it. Yeah, this is. Any other questions for Don?
So something I'd like to bring up with the group, and this is kind of the reason I noticed that the section was different on 20, in looking at our selection of configurations, 17 and 20 are nearly identical on our maps. So I don't know if we want to ask Don to treat those separately. That's a lot of time, and maybe we can look at those and think about that. And that's why I noticed that it wasn't correct on here, because on our maps, which was our most recent version of it, 17 and 20 are nearly identical.
The major difference between 17 and 20, as I recall, is one of them has 2 sections of dual language in Red Oak and 3 sections of monolingual in Thomas, and the
Yeah.
other one
Has it reversed.
has it reversed.
So it's like a one section difference.
Right.
It's not, I don't know if Don needs to treat it as a totally different concept, but we want to make sure that we have, a range and we're not kind of showing the same thing twice.
Well, I think that given how Don is pursuing this, it's not going to be a totally different, because he is taking this kind of modular approach.
Right.
It's not doing everything twice.
But even
It's
in
doing those
terms
two sites.
of looking forward, when we're talking about showing these 8 in a mailer or in the forums, do we have 8 or do we have 7? Or, what is the play on that? And then, that takes us into what Raph wanted to bring up, and I don't know if this was going to be under other, where we were
It's
going
under
to.
other.
Okay, we'll come back to that then.
So
Okay.
for what it's worth, there are 3 unique building types, it looks like, between those 2 models. You have OT4 under Model 20, you have RO5 under 17, and also W2 under 17. So if you deleted one of those models, you would be deleting 1 or 2 unique building
But
types.
I think we're saying, again, Indian Trail has 3 sections, and Oak Terrace has 4 and 17, and it's the reverse in Model 20. And I don't remember that as being a distinguishing factor.
No, and on the maps, they aren't like that. That's what I was saying. It's different on the sheet, is that on the maps, Indian Trail has 3 on both, and OT has 4 on both. And the only difference on the maps is the dual language section. And that's why I just want to make sure that what we're looking at, each one of our concepts solves for something different from what the other concepts do. So, just to the group, are these 2 solving for something different? That's kind of the question I just wanted to put out there with that.
They seem like the same general concept. It doesn't seem like a large enough architectural facilities difference to have the model that goes out. It seems like we could get to one from the other if we just have one.
Right.
It's just a difference in a section.
It's like, yeah, a
It's
section.
a section at O'Terra, at Wayne Thomas.
Well, and are you doing those? Are you doing those for other models? Is the question? I guess is the word. Then we're asking you to do additional drawings for the difference of one section at 2 sites. And I think maybe let's.
So if we did Model 20 instead of Model 17, that would mean the elimination of 3 unique plan types.
That's significant.
But Model 20 is the one that has the sectioning incorrect on it.
I'm going to make a judgment on this based on what makes it easier for us.
So how about don't do any work between now and tomorrow morning? We'll circle back to this later on the agenda, and we'll let you know how we're going to move forward.
Well, the other thing to notice is that 17 has dual language at 6 sections, and 20 has it at 7. So, based on what we know we have 7 currently in first grade and in kindergarten. So I don't know if that may be a distinguishing factor that, I don't know. Alex, you worked on 17.
I did. I think and this is what's tough between 17 and 20 is that, with dual language, we've heard from the administration that it's likely to sit around 6 to 7 sections per year, going forward. So we don't necessarily know if we're going to have 3 or 2 at Red Oak in any given year. So it's tough for us to design, as we're thinking about this, it's tough for us to say, well, it's going to definitely be this number or this number. It's more that the concept calls for, the 2 dual language academies to those 2 sites. You had this, maybe it's 2 sections with bubble space for 3, depending on whether this is going to be consistently 7 or, you know what I mean? Like it's.
But is that different enough from 20?
My feeling is it's not, but that's just fine.
So let's circle back to this.
Just a question though, as long as we're talking about that specific, if there's different drawings here, and it's related to 1 or 2 extra sections, it's the work that needs to get done for the drawings, but the dollars and cents of this shouldn't move things drastically. Is that, you're not talking about auditorium space or anything like that, you're talking about.
I just think we don't want to create extra work for him.
No, I understand that, but my point, I
would say that's correct. But for example, the clarification that you made that Indian Trail has 3 sections of all models. Okay, the way I had it, Indian Trail had 4 sections of one model. That might require an addition.
Right.
3 sections per model doesn't. So yes, in that case, it would make a big difference in terms of cost. But if you look at simply the difference between Red Oak and Wayne Thomas, both of those schools can accommodate 3 sections per grade.
Right.
So it should work for either one of the models that you have.
So the ultimate answer is, depending on Indian Trail, you may have an addition and we could get to a point of a dollars and cents aspect. Right. But from a drawing perspective, we could look at these models as the same general concept with that additional cost to be framed out in terms of.
I would not constrain yourselves at all by whether it means we have to draw an additional school.
But Indian Trail wouldn't be one of those because that should be 3 on both.
That's what I'm saying. So if it were 4 like I had shown it, then it would have resulted in an addition.
Right, but that's not the way it is on the map.
I think that for next steps, again, we're going to come back to this discussion of 17 and 20 later on this evening, but I think it would be meaningful for us to figure out how we're going to proof this if this is your working document. I think we need to figure out how we're going to go through this, if we want to do a task team or if we want to do this electronically, to proof this and find anything that needs to be clarified or corrected. So does anyone have a thought as to how we might best approach this document so that these guys continue to move at a pretty steady
Why
clip.
doesn't everybody who submitted a concept prove their own concept and, have one poor person taking that all in? So, because they're the best person to really make sure it's correct.
I think that's a good suggestion with the caveat that later on we're going to talk about how we're going to be suggesting modifications, revisions,
And we don't necessarily know what
variations.
these
Yeah.
early
You can't do that until we
We're not going to do that until we do this work. So this is
Okay.
work, yeah.
Those are the people that would know.
So people could prove their own work product is what Julie's saying.
The early ones, we don't necessarily have a originator attached to. Like the later ones we do. Do you want to do it?
Well, yes, they'll do it, but you, that was Adam. Actually.
Well, but you guys worked on it as a
I mean,
team.
Well, we
If
did,
it
but
involves
he.
just looking at the map and cross-checking,
Yeah.
I've already done it for a bunch of them, I can finish doing the rest.
All right,
Great.
I nominate Melissa.
I'm on it.
Quit nominating Melissa for stuff. Bennett, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a
No,
question,
I
and
didn't say
I'm still working on this thought, so it may just be completely off, or may just reflect that I haven't sat, at nearly as many of these meetings as most of you. Does it make any sense to ask Don, and so part of the question for you, Don, before going out and drawing these different concepts, to tell us, kind of rank them on, I'm thinking by, say, Red Oak, there's 4 different Red Oaks here. Which is going to be relatively, how expensive are these different things going to be? Not dollar amounts, but, lowest cost, middle cost, high cost sort of idea. And if, with that information coming back to the committee, help narrow the field before they go and do drawings of all these different options. Because ultimately, we're not going, I'm not sure what I know you intend to bring the board significantly fewer, and I'm guessing you don't really want to go out to the community with 8 options. I heard somebody start off with, we were hoping to have 4 or 5 or 6 at this stage. So is that make any sense as a process idea?
I think we need to get the numbers on the other side of this exercise and then continue to refine and focus. And I know that there's a real sense of urgency to figure out ballpark numbers, but I mean, my sense is that we'll know when we know, and we can't really hasten that costing part. I know that that's like the big question for a lot of
No, I
people.
don't know if I got my point across. The idea would be that you couldn't put a number on, but I'm not going to pick on anyone.
I think you did, Bennett.
You couldn't, what's that?
I think you did. We've had a lot of conversations about this topic,
okay.
so I think it was clear. And I think that coming back to this, there's been some discomfort, and I kind of wish John Fuhrer was here as well, because his opinion on this is important as well. That the kind of speed to the answer solution and sort of putting that out there in this forum and sort of having that bias the discussion was something that several different people had raised concerns about. These numbers can move around a lot, and I think this very qualitative modular piece is gonna add up to some unpredictable things. I just don't feel that it's consistent with the kind of deliberative, precise approach we've been trying to follow. Is that fair, Ronnie? It's sort of like saying, well, here's a high and a medium and a low, and this one's got 2 mediums and a high. It's like, is it that helpful? We've gone around this a bunch of times. We haven't come to one, despite the attractiveness of a faster short, sort of a shorthand.
I think,
we haven't come to one that feels like it has integrity.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, are you suggesting that we need to let things be as messy as they are right now?
I'm suggesting that among many very reasonable shortcut examples, I don't think we've ever found one that we felt comfortable doing. We did feel comfortable progressing with this approach to get to numbers. Don, if you have a wildly different perspective, it'd be good to hear that. I don't feel like we should make this decision without John Fuhrer as well.
Yeah, and he did weigh in. He did send out, a note about that he wanted to stay in line with Don's process, that he really thought that was important.
He he's been very clear on that so far.
Right.
But I understand the spirit of the question of many people have come up with a similar kind of like,
Yeah,
can't
is
we
there
do
a way to
this
get a
faster?
sense?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
The thing I would add to it is that I think to Bennett's question, it would be fairly easy to look at the elementary schools in each of the models you come up with and assess fairly quick. Most of the people in this room would probably assess fairly quickly whether it's relatively easy to accomplish or not. The challenge is going to be in the middle schools. That's where it gets messy. It's in the middle school. So I think looking at just the elementary schools, we might be able to get an answer to the question, but I think the real meat of it is going to be in figuring out the middle school side. That's tricky.
That makes sense.
One of the things that I see happening too is that we're going to have a whole lot of information in this process, these options. And there may very well be permutations, and not these 8 models, but there may be permutations that become more likely and more evident based on having done that work. Well, gee, if we did this and this, that'd be even better, save money or provide a better outcome. So, I think going through all of these, I think is important.
Rick, that's a really good point, because remembering back to where we were in the fall, what happened was 10 became 15, became 30, and then this is all pre-OMA, when we were still operating under different rules. And we had, I just remember the incredible number of email threads with changes, suggestions, ideas, different things, so it became basically an infinite number of possibilities. So as restrictive as it feels, the idea of channeling through a single linear path and then coming back, like you said, and taking the iterations here, because otherwise they go out in many tributaries in different directions.
Right.
So we're really, it was a painful process more where I actually felt like I totally lost the thread of being able to compare or keep track of anything in a very clear way when that was going on. So, but we do have other things to talk about related to how we want to manage the process, though, on the agenda. So I think we can come back to this point and say kind of how we're moving forward. Back to you, Ryan.
Are we good? We good?
Yeah.
We're good. Thank you so much, Don. Thank you. Okay. Moving on, agenda item 5.3, community engagement update and planning. Nicholas.
Sure, all right. So as Don had mentioned, we had originally scheduled a community forum for the 31st and 1st of May and June, but they need an additional week, so that essentially pushes us back for the community forums for the 7th and 8th of June. And the idea there is to have costing information and have that vetted before we bring it to a forum. So in knowing that, there's a big gap between now and June 7th and 8th. So we're looking to see how we can engage the community between that time. And what we're thinking, or what has been suggested by Link and the tri-chairs, is do a community mailer. So that would hit homes in mid-May. And this community mailer, we have to think out what we're going to put in it, obviously. But it would be the 7 or 8 or 5 options. We'd have to think about how we're going to describe each, or the narrative behind each option, and what cost information, if at all, do we put in there? Do we put a range? Do we send them to a website? Or do we just say, if you want in-depth cost information, please come to community forums in a few weeks? So that's really the first two things. So community mailer, hitting homes about May 22nd. A forum coming June 7th and 8th. We then talked about doing focus groups in late June to dig into some of these value questions that we're asking tonight, and that the survey focus group team has started to compile, and we're going to get feedback from all of you to see what we need to test from a qualitative standpoint. And then there's a question about an additional community survey. And really, an additional community survey, the question is, do we test value questions, or do we test specific questions about specific configurations? Do we show a number of configurations that ask questions about each? Or, so that's kind of the question. So what I'm thinking, and kind of bringing it here for feedback tonight, is waiting on the survey, using the previous survey to, and the focus group and the community forums to help you make your decision to narrow down to the 3. And then if the board so chooses and you're on board, doing a survey in July to help the board and essentially the community get from the 3 to 1. So that's really the idea there. So we were looking, we'd be looking at like a randomized survey from July 10th through July 31st, and then a public survey, or the public end of that survey from August 1st through August 15th, when people are coming back to school and back to town to start the school year.
So, sorry, question, were you saying this would be an aid for the board to get from 3 to 1?
Right. So the idea there is that if we try to squeeze in the survey before 2.0 narrows to 3, it would be rushed, right?
Right.
We'd have a couple weeks. People might think it's a disingenuous, So the idea there is to back off from that and do the survey, give the survey a little bit more time,
right?
To kind of percolate the community.
So there's more than one factor. So Davis, I understand your question. So it's not just to recast the survey as a board, decision tool to get from 3 to 1. The key driver of the timing and kind of the thinking right now about what role the survey can play, kind of taking a step back and looking at all the information we have. What can we ask now? What do we need to drill into? The feeling is that if we drove a survey out in the next several weeks, there's kind of 2 options. One would be a lot of detail about all of these things, all 8, which I think the feedback or the concern there would be fatigue with so much information, so much data. Would we get meaningful feedback, or would people peter out during the survey? Because if you start looking at it, it gets very overwhelming. Stop me if I'm mischaracterizing.
Also, someone getting attached to something and having it disappear on them. Sure. That has never been tightly, even had a chance of hanging in there.
So,
that's
in addition to that, there is also, as far as how we use the survey, and Jeff, I'll throw to you in a sec to comment on this, on whatever you want to talk about, but the sort of the purpose of the survey, you heard the questions that were raised by the one that Jeff, you just took us through. Some of those things, if we look at how we can use them to narrow down, this is the fork in the road that the 2.0 team has to essentially decide. Do we want to throw everything out there and get feedback on all of it? Or do we feel that we have enough richness of information from the sort of accumulated feedback that we have, and that we can refine further in these smaller, more intimate kind of engagements like the forums and especially the focus groups, and as Nicholas said, we may expand the number of focus groups. So using that as the primary mechanism in the near term to refine the 8 down to a more manageable number, and then really dig into aspects of that in a bigger survey would sort of be the sequencing. So it essentially flip what we were talking about before, but because of these multifactorial kind of considerations.
Can you, one more time, give it as a sequence?
Yeah.
Sure.
So the sequence, the proposed sequence would be, we now have all the information that we have, we all know what it is and where it's come from. And we have a bunch of proposals which are now going through a rigorous process. We're gonna get output from Don and from the Gilbane team that will give us much more, sort of quantitative feedback on the feasibility, on the attractiveness, cost of things. We can use that and all of the questions that have been raised, because we've been collecting questions like crazy as we take stock of the community forum, the focus groups, and the survey that we just got, which clarified where there's no clarity, right? There's a lot of things that people feel strongly about, but when you actually push deeper, we have no idea why, right? Or we can't really say why. And so what we would do is use focus groups and community engagement to really dig in and get a lot deeper under the hood of that, which would make a quantitative survey much, much better. Here's the last concern. If we went with a quantitative survey now, it would be very values-based. It wouldn't have as much of that context to make the questions more specific, and it would seem and look a lot like what we already just did.
I understand the kind of methodological and theoretical underpinning of what you're suggesting. What I'm getting lost on It's like, when does this stuff actually happen and in what order?
Oh, sure, so,
Yeah.
yeah, let me review
I
that.
thought you were going to ask me the teleological as well.
So we're
That's
talking-
after 9 o'clock.
So these dates may change, some of these dates may change, but this is the basic format. So it's a community mailer hitting homes May 22nd. A community forum held June 7th and 8th. Focus groups held June 22nd, 23rd, and we'll probably add a few more dates, so maybe the 24th also. And then the survey would be July 10th through July 31st, random, and then the public side of the survey would be August 1st through August 15th.
And pop in when we report to the board on
Sure.
our recommendations.
Yep, so that would, so you would likely, because the focus groups, you needed time to kind of go through that data. So that would mean that the board would have to call a special meeting, June 27th or June 30th, or you wait till the July board meeting, which there's no board meeting on the 4th, obviously, so it'd be the third Tuesday in July. So it'd be whatever that is, July 14th or whatever.
So the idea is on that night, we've already done enough work in focus groups and community engagement that we're presenting less than the number of models we're talking about now. We're somewhere on 2, 3, 4, 5.
Plus the Gilbane, Nagel-Hartrade.
Plus the Gilbane.
Yeah.
And then the suggestion is to do a survey that stretches into August as an aid to allow the board to choose from among those options.
Yeah, because the board's going to consider.
And a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, they're gonna have some staffing data.
Right.
They're gonna have some other data from the administration. So with all that data, a survey would be a part of that.
So, okay, now that I have that, here are my thoughts, and I see the logic of it. In a sense, it creates a little bit of ambiguity about whether the 2.0 process has ended or not, and I think we need to work out what that is. Because the way we were working previously is that the moment we sort of present to the board, here's what we think, now you go choose among the scope of your choices, there was a feeling that we're done. And so we may feel like we're going to continue, and that may be fine, but if we are in fact done, then there has to be some sort of mechanism for analyzing the feedback of the survey in a meaningful way that doesn't seem to remove agency from the board. And what I'm getting at is if we were to say, here's our ideas, see you later, oh yeah, and we got a survey going for you that we've designed, does the survey then sort of push the board or tie their hands in some particular way? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
We need their buy-in now on what that post 2.0 process looks like. Or we need to say 2.0 continues in some form to analyze.
Can I pause to
Sure.
thank you for pointing out something that it really is two decisions conflated as one that probably should be separated, right? So
That's the teleological.
it started, thank you. It started out as well, the survey goes here. And then as we kind of go through the logic, at least the people that have talked about it so far, and if there are other people that have different views, now's the time, right? Don't think of this afterward. This is the time to bring it up. It didn't seem to fit. It didn't seem to fit. It didn't seem to make sense. So that pushes it out afterward.
Sure.
And then so we just kind of deductively got to what it could do, but it doesn't necessarily have to even happen, right? I mean, so I think that it's probably the role of the survey. Decision one is, do we do the survey now or do we do other things first? What we do about the survey really doesn't have to be decided immediately. It's more of a sequencing thing, and then I think we can talk more about what the survey would be. It doesn't have to be only one thing.
When we see whether or not it makes sense to pursue, and I think we just need to, you had your hand up, I'm sorry. I'm gonna hand it over to Melissa.
No, go ahead. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. All I was going to say is that, I think whether it's 2.0 or the board making a determination about pursuing an additional survey, that's something we can see how the rest of this stuff shakes out. What we look like on the other side of the forums, what we look like on the other side of the focus groups.
I feel like it's not like we decided we don't need a survey.
Mm-hmm.
I think we decided that to make a really good survey, we need to ask really good questions, and we're going to be in a much better place to ask really good questions. So
Sure.
I would personally, forgetting about the timing, I would want to be able to validate some of the core things that we have sort of advanced as big beliefs and say, this is why we think these three are right. It'd be nice to validate that. We just have to think about how that fits in the overall process.
And I think that's why we can hold it in abeyance for now.
There's another benefit of the survey, and that is to demonstrate the
vast amount of work that's been done and allow everybody to have confidence, well, okay, I can give it my, my affirmative vote then because so much work has been done. It generates buy-in, so.
Credibility.
Credibility, yeah, that's everything. So I think that it's worthwhile, perhaps just for that.
The board will also have a role in education.
Are you still?
That's okay, go ahead.
The board's going to have a role in education throughout this entire process up to the election. And I think the survey would also inform that. So I think that we should decide that we want, I think we should have a survey, and it should be in the sequence that was described.
Well, we don't know if 2.0 is still, we don't know what 2.0 is going to look like on the other side of our recommendation.
Sure.
I guess, I'm sorry, Melissa, why don't you?
Well, that's what I wanted to weigh in on. I didn't envision us just handing it over and saying farewell. Like, we've established the trust and the relationship with the community piece of it. And I think if we just say, here you go, board, we're going home now, I don't think that is seeing our process through. I think we need to continue with the community engagement piece to support the board's process in making the decision. I think if we just leave it out there, then we've left them to kind of reestablish a relationship that we should all be working on together and moving forward till it's ready to go on the ballot.
Our charge was to come up with recommendations to the board. What happens after the recommendations are made to the board is to be determined. So anything that's beyond that date, it's up to the board to decide how they want to proceed, whether they want to use a subset of 2.0, use 2.0, or that's not our call. So if we're talking about things that are going to go past the recommendation point, it's a good placeholder for the board to utilize those as these are good dates, but it's not our decision to make.
I have a feeling Jeff might add some value on the topic of surveys and timing.
A couple of thoughts. I think the description of what the sequencing and what the survey would do versus the focus groups and the forums, I think for the more conceptual things, it makes total sense to be testing those in the forums and in the focus groups and those more qualitative settings. The next survey would best serve you if it's testing specific options. And the one thing I would say is, you described this as going, as going out to the community and testing potentially around 3 options to help the board narrow it down to 1. I would argue that if that's the purpose of the survey and it comes after your recommendations, then the survey should be commissioned by the board. And the board is involved in designing the survey and the results are presented to the board. However, the other option of conducting it to get from 5, 6, 7, 8 options down to 3 could still be done in a survey without having people evaluate 5, 6, 7, or 8 options. Similar to what we did in this past survey, where we randomly selected 1 bond option. We could, of the 8, let's say, we could have people look at a random number of 3, at most 4 options and respond to those. That way we would have several hundred people responding to each option, but we're not wearing them down. Okay, here's option number 6. Now here's option number 7. Now that 7 looks a lot like number 2. We don't want to go there, but if we can keep it to a manageable number, then we look at 3 or 4 options, and that helps 2.0 go from 8 down to 3. I just wanted to throw that out there as an option. It would mean an accelerated process as soon as the costs are vetted, the forums are done, the focus groups are done. We're hitting the survey like within a few days after.
So you rotate the sample of what you're getting people to.
You would get options 1 through 3. You would
I think there was a lot of good information that came out of this survey, but on the value questions, I think there's still a lot of areas to dig in deeper, and I suppose we can accomplish that in the focus groups and in the community forum, but I'd also like to see, as we've had more forums, that we can test some of those things a second time, because right now it's just like a blip on some of those things.
Well, I would also suggest that in those forums, the people who are attending the forums are going to be more likely to have those concerns and want to speak to things about the consistency of the schools,
Right.
as opposed to in a random sample,
Right.
it might be 10% who are really concerned about that. Finding that 1 in 10 is going to be more difficult. In the forum, it might be a third, half of the people there are going to have an opinion on it.
I just want to point something out. I think that a lot of, as we already noticed, 20.
Little ladder art.
As we already noticed, 20 and 17 look much alike. So it's possible that we really don't have 8 configurations, but 7 here. And then also when we get the numbers back from Don, it may be that some of these configurations are just, based on the survey results that we already got, are just way too expensive to even consider. And so that might further reduce our configurations down to a more manageable number to then put into.
Yeah, I would assume that when we give this to the board, okay, when we give our recommendations to the board, 3 or 4, whatever it is, we don't just say, here they are, but that these are our reasons, and so that when they go out to market it or whatever happens with that, there are good reasons for why we chose what we chose.
I mean, I'd love to have you guys as to help with community engagement, I can't-
You don't want to do that by yourself?
Right.
He's getting a little nervous.
Board responsibility means he does it.
I want to raise one issue real quick, and that is, I think the process that Raph laid out makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the place the survey would fall into terms of the research. I do think that we need to think about if the committee's going to make a recommendation, and yet there's going to be some assumption that people who are on the committee are going to continue to be involved with assisting the board in further developing, refining, doing survey research, whatever it is, that we make sure that we formalize that as a group prior, as a part of the process, so that it's very clear to the community that's what's occurring.
Yes.
So, and that it's understood, like, who from the committee is going to continue to be involved in that, what those meetings are going to look like, whether, all that, those questions are going to be very important in terms of people feeling like they don't have any confidence in the process. So I think that actually will work as a way to do that. We have to be sure that we cross all our
That's
T's.
very clear, and I think that's a very strong recommendation. So I've heard 2 or 3 themes. I want to just check for understanding and see if people are if we're sort of tracking. One is, generally the sequencing makes sense, but there are other things about the survey that we like, and there's still some regret that, do we really want to just totally pitch that until later when it's a more ambiguous future of 2.0, 3.0, I don't know what it is. So I guess we could, in a parallel path, at least evaluate what an interim survey or a parallel path survey would look like if it were to dive into things. It's a fair question to ask, Dan, I think you were asking, which is, there's bits and pieces, and maybe there are big chunks that we would love to dive into more. I think we will still do a better job after this community engagement and the focus group, because we're just going to get better information that will help us to ask the questions in the right way. But, so I don't, just speaking for myself, I don't feel like we have to make an ultimate decision about whether or not we're doing the survey.
I don't think we should. I don't think it would
right
be
now.
responsible to make an ultimate decision right now.
Yeah.
So we're good.
I would just add, the survey doesn't have to be either or. We can test 3 configurations, and we can repeat that question about what the priorities are. And if this, say, consistency is my most important concern, or the most important goal of this process, we can have a follow-up question and ask, articulate specifically, what do you mean by consistency? What are your concerns about consistency? I mean, we can do both. We're not adding a lot of questions around a couple, if it's a couple of these issues that are going to be consistency.
Okay. So if the recommendation is to not make a decision tonight about whether to do the survey later on, what exactly is the question that we're discussing?
I think that is the question, because if we decide that we're not moving forward on the survey full steam ahead, then we are in fact saying that we're going to wait to do a survey until after 2.0 makes its recommendation. Because if we needed to do that prior to them making that recommendation, we would need to get to work, right?
That's your May date, actually, for the survey.
And I will say,
And that seems early.
just to sort of step back and look at this more broadly, I think that we will need to, I think we've got our groups in place for do we have a group in place for the next mailer? For the website?
Do not.
So this is something that we actually need to do with regards to next steps.
The mailer is
I don't know
the
what
next
it
thing.
And things have obviously changed. We've had people leave, we've got people who have come on, and I think we want to make sure that we have balanced groups working on that. So there's work, there's work. That is the next.
Well, but I think we are making a clear recommendation that we're not going to go full speed ahead with survey development right now.
Yes.
So that is a decision.
So that's the question number one is survey before recommendations or no survey before recommendations.
And Nicholas is pointing out, well, if we don't do it right now, then that means that we're going to be doing it after the recommendation.
Well, only sort of, because the we is the undefined quantity.
And it might be us and it might be the board, and I think that's to be determined.
Right.
2.1.
But I do want to second. But it may make sense for this group, before it makes its recommendations, to actually recommend a series of future engagement steps that the board could act upon
Yes.
as a useful service. But I want to second what Alex is saying here, that it's really important to work out, perhaps in a board workshop, publicly, in a very clear manner, what's going to happen when 2.0 stops. Because that's where this all went off the rails last time, so let's not make that same
Are you
mistake.
referring to CFAC transition to board?
CFAC is that's
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden there were some members of CFAC who were on a committee. That committee membership was not open to everyone. There wasn't a clear understanding in the community of what was happening there. We can fix that problem because we know what the problem is and we've already identified it.
Yeah.
Dan, did you have something? I saw you.
Actually, I wanted to go back to the mailer in May. I mean, I think it's important we consider what we're going to put into it. I'm not sure that it wouldn't be a misstep to do the 8 or 7 maps that we have, the possible configurations that we have right now. That might raise so many questions in the community.
Yeah,
Because
so
it's going to beg the question.
So you're saying
cost.
you think it would be a misstep? I just want to make sure.
Potential. I think it is.
I
I think it is a potential misstep.
Okay.
I wonder if the mailer should more be focused on really the findings of the previous survey and getting a sense of this is what we've learned about what the community thinks.
So our last mailer was very dense with information and very well received, I have to say. Like when people approached us at the forums, it provided context, it provided understanding that didn't exist before. And so I think there are a couple of different ways to pursue this. And I think really we are gonna have to figure out who's working on this, what we want it to look like. But I don't disagree. I mean, it's not just going to be
Yeah, I mean, sending a mailer, here's 8 maps, look at.
No, I mean, there was a lot of
Too much
thought and purpose
Yeah.
behind the last one, and I think we'll make sure that the same is true this time around.
If we're focusing on community engagement in this mailer, the mailer needs to talk about what the process is going forward.
Yeah.
The steps that we're going to go to, whether it's community engagements and surveys and board presentations and things, that's what this mailer needs to be. Putting models out there, it's just going to go right in the garbage. No one's going to pay attention to it, and it's going to be very confusing.
And it's just going to create more questions.
Sure.
But going back, let me just one more question. So you mentioned, I think, May 22nd. Walk us back as to when whatever it is needs to be done in order to get it in someone's mailbox by May 22nd.
It's starting right now.
Yeah,
I know, that's why I asked the question.
so essentially, we would have to have the mailer wrapped up by May 15th to get it in homes on May 22nd. It'd have to go to the printer on May 15th.
Let's just call it May 10th. Just
Yeah, May 10th. So, yeah, I mean, time is short, and I think for what is contained in the mailer is still an open question. We need to meet. Originally, it was to unveil the 8 options, right? So there is a concern from Link that we went from 24 to 8 to 3, and we're not bringing the community along.
Right.
So it's the best way to do that. I don't know what that is, so we need to think about that. Whether it's showing the 8 options, whether it's kind of showing your work, how did you get through this process, we have to decide that.
It's just telling what the process is.
Yeah, I think just like discursively explaining,
like a narrative.
Well, here's what we've done, and now going forward, here's how you can be involved.
Yeah.
And that's what it
And I think the mailer has to focus on getting people to come to the forum. So if you put out the process and put out maybe some of the questions, and then come to the forum and express your thoughts, and express your opinions.
And maybe say there aren't maps on here, but there'll be maps at the forum.
There you go.
Can I just clarify?
Dollars at the forum.
Numbers that we're gonna get back,
are scheduled for June?
No, we're getting the numbers back starting next week probably.
Oh.
None?
He's not far off.
I'm just trying to get a sense of like, are we gonna have those numbers before, obviously, so not before May 15th?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So that's another reason not to put maps on it.
So Ronnie, we'll have some of the models, like if we're gonna tackle Brayside first, I'm just using it as an example. We might have some models for Brayside drawn, but Gilbane is then gonna need another week or two to pull together the estimate. So I think we're at least 2 weeks away from having a first pass at some of the school types to be able to review the cost process.
Can I just, because I'd like, this timeline, there's 8 plans now. Mailer is gonna go out. We'll get numbers, and there's more work in between that point. But then from those numbers, there's the potential of like just a straight up, these plans get the chopping block, you know, because they're just not feasible, they're just not gonna work with what we've got. So there's the possibility of dropping from 8 to a number lower than 8. And then between June, if I'm just penciling in there as an estimate, June 1st to the community forums the following week, we're gonna say like, these are the ones that are feasible, and there's a lot of work to figure out what questions we want to talk to people about that we're going to use to try and get that number less than 8, theoretically, or we find out that all of them work, but then we still have to take that 8 down to 3 by either June or July, depending when we ask the board to do this.
Well, right, and you know, it's interesting. So one of the things that this touches on is all that we will have, but also all that we won't have. So we can look at what something is going to cost when we put it on the ballot, but until we have boundaries drawn for any of these, we can't get a staffing model. And a staffing model is key in terms of our operating expenses. And so that's actually, let's put that in the parking lot for the mailer. That's like a really important piece of community education.
I think what you're addressing is one thing that's really starting to bother me, which is it sounds like we're eliminating models based on Don's dollar amount. Sorry, Don, just throwing you under the bus here. Based on dollar amounts, when we're not taking consideration that the survey doesn't take into consideration the cost benefit of any of this. It says, I don't like 150 million, so we're not gonna go with anything 150 million. If you went to someone and said, 150 million gets you a fund balance above the threshold for 50 years, and your property taxes will go up, but your home value potentially, this is a slippery slope, goes up by 30% over the next, I mean, there's a cost benefit that we have not even touched.
But not to everybody.
The cost benefit's great, but only a
No, I agree, but there's always, my point is, we've only focused on, I don't want to do anything at this price point, or I don't want to have my taxes go up by this, but we don't take them the full circle and say, here's what happens if we do this and it's not the end of the world. I'm not saying we have a solution for that, but to start saying we're going to axe or whatever word you said, talk about getting rid of models because of numbers coming from Don, we can't do that. That's a big, big mistake.
I agree, and I think that, you know, for the people for whom a certain dollar amount is going to be just out the gate a non-starter, we need to be okay with that, and I think we know that. We know that from every piece of community engagement we've ever seen.
40% of those, no matter what.
Yeah.
We can't
and we need to be okay with that.
Well,
So-
I think the forums are an important place to discuss the value propositions, like to show the numbers with the concepts, to talk them through, to have people available to answer questions so that we can really get that feedback of, well, this isn't worth it to me, but this might be, you know, that kind of thing.
So would you say that we wouldn't have to, we don't necessarily need to wait till those numbers come in to start crafting the community forum conversations?
Correct.
Right, you say that that's not necessarily like a deciding factor, it's just, it's maybe a piece of it, but like, we can start the work of that plan.
Well, and certainly giving context and nuance by explaining that those are all considerations that we might not be able to show them yet, but that they need to bear in mind.
I've always envisioned, and I'm not sure if anyone agrees, but that among others, we would present something that was sort of a baseline, low dollars, something middle of the road, and a premium product or something like that. And then maybe a fourth that was unique in some respect, you know, a grade center, just something, some kind of a twist. But I do think it's important that we shouldn't discount dollars right off the bat right now. But for exactly what you're saying, it's our, you know, we ought to present a menu of options, low, medium, high, or something.
Except for everyone, that was where we thought we were gonna go, and then we decided that that wouldn't be very effective, because anytime you show low, medium, and high, that was an early concept.
Right.
There's a predisposition to low, because they've been given, if we're presenting it, we say it addresses the major things that we came here to do, in other words, consolidate schools.
But if we can say, and this is just hypothetical.
Yeah.
If we can say the low option is a low price point today, but after 6 years, we're back at this again, versus the medium option or the high price option, which solves this problem for 50 years.
Here's what you get.
That's what has
Yeah.
not come to people.
Well,
Or to us.
and the educational piece too.
And the educational
If
piece.
the community is telling us that that's the most important thing, we need to find out if it actually is.
And engaging on, you know, on the different fronts that are going to be important to different people. You know, so that's where that kind of value proposition
Yeah.
is going to really
We can
vary.
upsell if we feel strongly about something.
What do you think about the idea
That
of
goes to this whole
showing,
discussion over there about why.
distributing plans on the basis not of concepts? This is the strongest, I don't know, community concept that says the most innovative, whatever, distinguishing them and by some characteristics, as opposed to base. We're almost saying one is the best, and that the most expensive is the best. But anyway, low, medium, high. What'll happen if you go low, medium, high?
I think we pretty much did that. I think anything, and we had to, because we don't have any details on what 75 million represents versus.
Oh, I see, by putting out your dollar.
If we have a specific option, these schools consolidate, this school closes, this school stays open, a new one gets built. Here's what the cost is, and here's what it means. These are the benefits, and these are the costs. And if the benefits are, you know, this is a short-term solution, we might have to come back in 7, 8 years, you know, to deal with it more long-term, but this has the lowest impact versus something that has a bigger impact, but is a more long-term solution, brings in some new innovation, ensures greater consistency across the school. You have to convey the value, the relative value of each option. So it wouldn't be just the math, but it would be a very brief, tight, but honest narrative of what each option represents and doesn't represent.
And do you think it would be to our benefit to select and offered in the obvious, the ones you chose, what you could get for 150, what you could get for 100? Is that likely to get unveiled where your referendum would pass or fail?
It would certainly be closer than what we have here, because we didn't have any of the deliverables, any of the outcomes here. We just said, broadly speaking, if this accomplishes all the goals and cost X and it raised your property taxes by Y, would you support or oppose it? It was very vague. It was a very blunt assessment of the different price points. It doesn't get to the value of each price point.
So Jeff, if we do a mailer, what would you recommend putting in it? What do you think would be?
My personal recommendation would be not to put the options in the mailer, because I think it's going to be confusing for people to try. And at best, the best worst case scenario is it's going to be confusing. The worst case scenario is they're going to misinterpret it, misunderstand it, come up with reasons why all of these are garbage, or why would I ever consider, why did they even come up with this? I think you need to walk people through this process. I think the idea of using the mailer as a teaser, we've got our options, we're going to be presenting them at the forum on these dates. If you're interested and you want to see them and you want to learn about them and ask questions, please show up. I think that's a much more effective use of the mailer.
And I also think that you can start to unpack things like grade centers, or, you know, at the community forum, a lot of people say, well, what's a cohort? What's a section? So we could put the key in there. Link is gonna design a graphic that they talked about many meetings ago that's a roadmap to the process. So this is when boundaries are gonna come out. This is when transportation plans are gonna be finalized. These are school transitions. So I think that could be a major facet of a mailer. Do we have 6 volunteers that want to be on this mailer team?
You can actually up that.
Okay, after we lose our board members.
Huh? Yeah, I mean, no, because you've expanded your group, so now you're not limited to 6. Now you have
I
to-
think if you lose the board members, you could maybe push 7, but you've had some no-shows for a while here. I think 6 is a safe number at this point.
This is 6 that can meet without.
Without OMA requirements of posting it.
So why are we still doing that? Why don't we just notice everything at this point?
It's the work. I mean, unless you want to
It's
actually-
managing the work.
The emails, that's the issue. There's a lot of this happening.
It's not
over
just the emails. I think that having
2 days notice.
a big meeting and having to get through a ton of material and noticing the meeting, it's just unwieldy.
Well, I'm not suggesting a big meeting, but I'm saying if there's a group of 6 or 7 people, notice that meeting, and then if people from the public want to come or make comment or say, I heard you're doing a mailer, I just don't think we should be proceeding
They
with
won't
small
come
groups
anyway.
that are outside.
I think that's fine. I mean, if you think that that's an important
I totally do.
adjustment, then, I mean, does anyone have any issue with that?
think
There's
the
nothing we're
steering-
saying in any meetings that we shouldn't be saying.
That's what I'm talking about.
The steering meetings are noticed, but no one ever comes for something.
Right. I actually don't think anyone's going to come, but I think it's really important to do all of this out in the open. I just don't see what we gain by trying to get around OMA at this point. in the
There you go.
process.
Very good. So, 7?
No, okay, like, it doesn't matter.
Or 10?
Doesn't matter, it's made open meeting.
So
Well, it
anyway.
depends when you're,
It is good to get a feel for who's interested in working on this.
And who has the bandwidth. I think it's also really important when you're looking forward to this work. It's going to be a really aggressive schedule. It was a ton of work last time, for those of you who weren't involved in the mailer. It's very labor intensive.
Oh my
It's
gosh,
very
absolutely.
compressed. So with that, I know I just sold it. Who wants to do it?
This one's gonna be a lot easier.
I'll do it.
I'll do it
This one's
again.
gonna be really fun. Well, somebody has a learning curve on the mailer if it's gonna be folded like that. too.
But we already fixed it.
Okay.
And we know everything now about
If it's
it.
gonna be an open
Volunteers.
meeting type thing, you need to get people that can meet at the same time.
Openly.
So I have just a clarification for if we change it up, like, as I'm like just jotting some things down that could potentially go down in, in the mailer, like, the summary of the process. But the summary of the process is all these different parts of like the heat map and the 3 different facets of the heat map, the summary of the conversations with Cutie and Dave Archery and everybody. So like if we say we're gonna do this Open Meetings Act, like if I said, hey, I feel like I've been invested in this part of the process, like I can write up a draft summary of that, like does that need to happen at the meeting, or can I do that offline and then submit that, and people look at it and provide feedback, but like all that providing the feedback has to happen at the meeting? Would that be the drawback of making this a big meeting rather than?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even call it a drawback. That's just kind of a technicality. And then the other piece that we all need to bear in mind is that Nicholas is the contact for all of this to go through to Link. And in terms of, finessing the language and the formatting and all of that, that happens with the committee, and then Nicholas collaborates with Link.
But he can write something up, send it out to this group. That group can respond to Nicholas with their feedback individually, and that can be incorporated into a document. It doesn't have to all be done in one big meeting.
Right.
And I would only change my recommendation if you told me that the way the first one was made is a lot of back and forth emails.
It was.
And that the process would be greatly injured by funneling it through one person. And if you were to make an argument for time and expediency.
It was a lot.
It was a lot.
Because we also routed it to the board, and we routed it to all of 2.0,
Right.
and so there was feedback coming back constantly from all different directions. And, because then you took it to a group, and that all
Right.
came back, and we had to incorporate all that. So we went back and forth on the main document that we were sharing with Link multiple times, getting everybody's feedback and everybody's input, the finance guys, just...
Right. And so what I don't want to do is throw up a roadblock to getting it done.
No, I don't think anyone will come. I think that's fine.
Right.
So again,
No,
We couldn't pass emails, we couldn't conference calls.
Couldn't be kept under 6.
Right.
Once we started expanding, everybody was weighing in.
So Nicholas, given what you know about the last time around, your preference would be to keep it under a form?
It would.
Okay,
I
that's,
mean, we can record it, post it, if we, you know, we need, I don't know.
So we can also bring the mailer into the, and have it
Yeah,
presented
there
at
you
this
go.
meeting for comment and adoption.
let's do that.
So it's
Okay,
just
so
wrap up
again,
the team, and it would actually be, the work would be finalized in this meeting.
okay.
That's a good idea.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, and at 9:15, again, I'm asking, so now we're asking for 6 volunteers for the mailer.
I mean,
And when does this have to be?
Tomorrow.
Yesterday.
Yeah, it's gonna be quick, it's gonna be quick, so we'll need to meet right away and get it going. Nicholas, did you get everybody?
Yeah.
I did. Mark, Lori, Dan, S, Jory, Melissa,
Helen.
am I over 6 then? I can bow out if we're over, so I do have some,
that's
I have some crazy
Jory,
busy week.
Mark, F, Lori,
weeks coming up.
Dan, Julie, Melissa.
And Julie?
So I'll set a meeting and, we'll meet or have a conference call and then we'll start.
So just to clarify, this will take place, that these will not be noticed, but we're going to bring everything to the full.
Yes.
So, so I have a request then, because this is important. It can't be one of those things where like you send it to all of us a day before and you're like, this is it, you have 10 minutes to look at it and figure it out whether you like it or not. You have, if you don't want to build in that, the hard work time on the production end, you've got to give like a real meaningful feedback voice for us.
Well, that's what we did last time, we sent the first draft, the second draft, the third draft, like all before we went to Link, and then once they came back to us with the layout,
As
then
long
we
as the
went
full
3
committee
more
gets to
times.
see that, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I just know the time is tight.
It's
and
tight,
gonna
but it
take
was
a while
last
to do
time
it.
too.
That is the vision.
Nicholas, do we need, sorry,
No, I guess I'm separate.
Nicholas, do we need to figure out who's working on the forums tonight as well?
I don't think so.
Okay, then let's
Yeah,
not do
let's
that.
set tonight.
I want to talk about terminology and the description of the process. What we're talking about is 8 models and getting them down to 3, and then those go to the board and they pick one. That's probably not actually how it will happen. It'll be very close to that. But what will happen is the board is going to have 3 options, and they're going to then have a ton of other information. And from those options and from the other information, they're going to come up with something that may not look exactly like one of the 3 that we send them. So we may want to have a board member or a future board member describe what they think that process might look like after we hand them the 3, so that that's what we can describe and what we tell the community is what's going to happen.
So Rick, I think this, I connect this to what Davis was pointing out earlier. When the idea of the survey and all these things that would happen after we deliver our 3 recommendations, I do think we need to hash out exactly what that looks like.
Yeah.
And have that sort of well-oiled and well-publicized before we come with our recommendations. So that's another set of considerations around what the board will be doing with the recommendations, how we'll be communicating the engagement, all those pieces. So I think that's something we should have for a future meeting, to have a proper discussion around it.
Yeah, because if the community is told that it's
But not
one of
now.
these 3, and then it's something different,
Correct.
that'll look like CFAC.
Right.
And as
Obviously, the new board will be seated at the next meeting, right? And I don't know if I should do we or they, you know, well, I'll say we.
Those people.
As of, when I become one of them, I will not know how to answer that question, right? So we can't bake it into the, anything that's getting produced now, because it's and where I'm ultimately headed, though, is I think, in line with what Raphael's saying, just for my 2 cents, this is a discussion we should start having together between the board and this committee about how does this handoff, for lack of a better word, it shouldn't literally be a handoff. The idea that you would say, here's our report, we're gone, we have some questions, no, we're gone, we're done, there's got to be some kind of coordination that's happening.
I think that's a great point, and I think that one of the things that happened with the timing of the last round of forums is it was right around the election, and so we had board members, but I would really love to see, no pressure guys, but really strong board attendance and board involvement in the forums, because I think it'll be important not just to collaborate, but to really let people see and participate in that interaction with the board in 2.0.
And there is a board workshop on May 9th, so if you want to keep it a board workshop, with that as being one of the purposes of it.
Wait, I'm missing the thread here. You're talking about the forum, at the public forums themselves, or in the design?
She's talking about the forum, but he's saying that there's an opportunity for us to hash some of this stuff.
To figure that out, yeah, and I think that's a good
Absolutely.
Really, with the board,
Yeah.
it's just not very
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well, I absolutely agree. I'm glad to hear everybody else going.
All right.
We got a huge amount of talent. You guys have done so much work, and like we need to. I mean, some of us are you. I mean, I'm an exception. I'm a board member who hasn't been on this committee for however long, but yeah, let's maximize the.
Yeah, it seems like the biggest challenge we have is the personal pronouns.
Do we have a committee for ourselves?
Everyone is
So with that, it is 9:20, and we have, Nicholas, are you comfortable in terms of where we are with community engagement? Were there any other action items that we needed to address tonight?
Mark's great. He just went through the calendar with me real quick. So we're going to have to meet very soon. So the team that we just identified, we're probably going to have a call by the end of the week, and so I'll be in touch.
Okay. Awesome. Agenda item 6, other. Very briefly, and it is 9:20, we had promised to review our parking lot from the night the lights went out in Green Bay, and we didn't, so I don't have that. Nicholas. John, do you have the
I
parking
could
lot?
get it in our minutes, or if you want to do it
Oh.
Monday.
Oh.
We have a meeting Monday.
Amazing. Melissa, take it away.
All right. I think Nicholas kind of put branding there, so.
Okay, so Nicholas categorized the feedback into branding, which is comments about branding the R2.0 team and the overall process, engagement, items to consider for the survey focus groups or for general communication with the public, and process, comments, questions on the R2.0 process. So in the parking lot, under branding, test drive names for this. E.g., a ballot initiative should be called education initiative versus referendum.
Right. Just avoiding the R word. I remember there was a conversation about that.
Okay.
There was this connotation, the R word has a negative connotation.
Okay. Okay, so that's an interesting discussion topic. Another one under branding, Reconfiguration 2.0 versus Education Committee. Is that also, somebody's interested in renaming our group, or does anyone remember what that comment was?
That's what it was.
Tied to? Okay. And then under engagement, dig deeper into the consistency of education experience, student experience. We talked about that. Also under engagement, when communicating to the public about the heat map and process, be sure the focus is holistic, not item by item. I think this one is, I don't know who wrote it down, but this is going to come up because we're going to be setting up the web page to show our process and to show, how we arrived at 24, and then how we got from 24 to 7-8, how we got from 8 to 3. We're going to need to make that very accessible, and we need to think about what that looks like. Because when you actually pull up our spreadsheet with all the different tabs of all the different things, and you've got the 24 concepts that you can scroll through, it's a lot to look at. So we may need just to figure out how we can make that more digestible in terms of showing our work. Then, let's see, also under engagement, dig into shared burden versus benefit. And this is something that's in the Google Doc that we're putting together for focus groups, forums. It seems like after tonight's discussion, that's probably going to land in the forum focus group category. Look, there he is.
Yes.
Also under engagement, traffic, busing, degree of change, what are the real questions and concerns? And again, the Google Doc, and Nicholas, are you going to be able to route that Google Doc to everybody?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, so that everybody can see how these things have been added to by different people who said they wanted to work on that piece. And then under process, one more under engagement, clear definitions of cohort versus class size versus sections. Nicholas brought that up. Maybe we can work that into the mailer, figure out a way to work that into, kind of help people with some of the glossary items. And then process. When evaluating options on whether they require a referendum, consider whether there is sufficient space for educational programming objectives like full-day kindergarten. So I think that's going to probably come into play after we get a little bit more information from Don. Is that?
Which schools are struggling, configurations are struggling to get full-day kindergarten in them? Is that what you're saying? Or an obvious struggle?
Yeah.
Is that what that item means?
Is that what that item means? Anyone want to speak to it?
Who wrote it?
You all want to speak to it?
That's what we don't know.
Okay, well, it's just something to keep in mind, and we may be able to talk about that more after we get more information from Don. And then also under process, the word transition confuses me. I thought it meant number of times a kid changes schools as we close buildings and build new ones. And again, we kind of built this out in that Google Doc. Transition, I mean, I think that's a very valid concern that transition can mean the implementation of the reconfiguration. How are we transitioning the kids during that implementation period? Or transition can mean within a plan, we're saying it has two transitions.
Well, it has matriculation is another way to look at it.
Or matriculation, right.
And the other is transition, and that's matriculation.
It's another definer term.
Right, right. So maybe we get that in with, that's a good idea.
But
Good
you
idea.
separate those transitions.
Right, so we need to
In other words,
define-
no one knows.
We need like a word
That's
wall,
great.
like a vocabulary word wall for, I'm serious, like we need vocabulary, we need like a definition, and then an example, and then using it in a sentence. I'm not even kidding. I'm dead serious.
Never on the website.
Okay, also under process, frequency of boundary changes. And we know that that's something that comes up, and I think that's also, now that, we've decided to, put the survey in a different category, that that is something we can talk to in the forums, focus groups. We're not going to have boundaries decided by those, so we won't be able to speak to your house is here, which means you go here in this configuration. And sometimes that is what people really want to know, just where are my kids going to school next year? But we can talk about the frequency of boundary changes as it relates to, the other things we've talked about with the concepts. And then the last one on process, are additional financial resources more crucial at the elementary or middle school level? And this was something you were asking about. So
I put it on the parking lot too.
yeah,
Sorry.
so no, that's great. That's what it was for.
Yeah.
I don't think, did we arrive at a conclusion about how we might dig into that?
That's got the Google Doc after Helen mentioned it today.
Okay. Okay,
So
good.
we could likely
Great.
ask her.
Yes, somewhere in a focus or a forum, because that could really help you target your configurations too.
Yeah, and then there was another one that was on the Google Doc that we didn't really understand. The one about differentiation. It was on the parking lot, and we weren't sure what the question was. It was
differentiation in elementary versus middle school.
differentiation in elementary versus middle school. Does anyone here remember? Did they put that in the parking lot? Do they want to speak to clarifying it?
They might not be here tonight.
Okay. All right, so that's what we've got so far, and then Nicholas is going to wrap that document, and it has, we've been kind of filling it in with some more detail, and it'd be great if everyone took a look at it, and that's kind of the basis of where we're going with the focus groups and the forums.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for
With regards to revisions, additions, modifications, Raph has brought up a really important question, and I am posing it now for you to not answer right now. Take this home and reflect on it. Is there in these 7 or 8, do we have everything here? Is there anything missing that you don't see reflected here?
Not fine tuning, but something distinct.
Conceptual.
So, yes, so if there is, we're gonna have to have a conversation about it and not know, because it's 9:30. And the other thing is, if there's fine tuning, if there's a revision, even if you originated a model, or if you didn't and you want to see a change to it, it's really important that any of those changes be discussed and moved along in the big meetings. So a couple people in the last week, and it's really, it's not nefarious. It's like people wanna get stuff done. So, you know, there's emails circulating, there's conversations. We can't make any changes to this outside of this big group. We can't make any additions. I just feel like that is where we create an opportunity for someone to question the integrity of the process. So next time we meet, bring that to us.
It's in the spirit of two things. One was, as we work through the heat map.
Sending them to John.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm gonna come back to that. So when we talk through the heat map, and so obviously we've been generating concepts for a long time, right? We had many different concepts, and as I mentioned earlier, a ton of variations of those concepts were spawned in the email change and kept just building and building in complexity. So what we've come back to is this set that we've landed on through a lot of work, and I think so I think what's important is you hear how just that list turns into 39 separate things that have to be thought through. So what we're not asking for is any other ideas, you know, shoot them over. That's not the spirit of it. I think the spirit of it is gut check. We spend a lot of time getting to the ones we're on here, flipping through the maps, thinking about it. Now's the time. If there's something else significant that needs to make it into that set to get to the right 3, Ira, that you mentioned, you know, there's going to be a spectrum that we don't have that's really important. We want you to tell us, and, you know, send it to John's, but it's got to go through the same level of rigor, right? It can't just be a couple of jotted lines in an email. It has to go through. We need you to put it through the heat map model, and we'll have to look at it all together again, and then we'll have to get it over to these guys.
You just said you don't want new configurations, but everything we've had has gone through the heat map. So what is it you're asking for?
So if there is some variation or something that somehow fell along the way, one of the 20 that didn't make it into the 7 or 8, that upon reflection, you want to make a case to the gang here, we really should keep this in. All we're asking for is, if it wasn't in the heat map already, put it through the heat map and bring the case, send it to the Johns, and we will put it on the agenda to do that. So we don't want to cut off at this stage. We need to end this process quickly in order to be able to move forward and actually do all of the work, you know, externally with Naval Hard Trade and Gilbane and in all these engagement forums to really get the right feedback on all this stuff. But if there is anything in that hopper that's not going into the process, that needs to go into the process, now is the time to make the case and to get it in there.
And for those of you who weren't on the community feedback group for the heat map, if you are advancing a model and you have to go through this exercise yourself, it really needs to be stressed that when you're looking at community feedback, it's not just what you've heard, it's what we saw reflected in the reports from the survey and the forums, because it's not just like what we're culling sort of subjectively.
The rationale you'll have to defend the rationale. And it's not, we've had to defend the rationale and all these things. That's why we spent many hours as a group talking about it.
Correct.
So it's just gonna have to earn a place. It can't just sort of be included because here's another idea.
Can I just take that as an opening to jump in and say, you guys should be really proud of what you're doing. I mean, I think you are working, you've done so much work, and the quality of the work and the quality of the process and the thought that you've put into it is, sure, somebody's gonna criticize it because they don't like stuff, but you know, you don't have anything to be feeling like you fell short about. You know, I'm really kind of in awe of how much work you all have done and the quality of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
One last wrap for the folks at Nagel Heart Train. To the extent you guys, while you're starting to draw some of this up, come upon an idea that we haven't expressed, and I suspect you would have already said it, but to the extent, you know, if you, well, just move this here and it becomes a lot more palatable, please offer it up if you haven't already.
We will. I mean, the one example of that was when we got the models, and I talked to John about it, it was IT place model. I said, what about dividing it 5, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah, he said, I mean, that's a perfect.
Eureka moment.
So I think we will bring that up.
As we're proofreading our own models on here, who are we routing those changes to?
John and John.
I checked.
Just to John, yeah.
Good job.
I checked all of them over. I have corrections on this sheet,
Yes.
but if you, I mean, I think someone should double check my work, but I did double check every single model.
And reissue that's good.
Yeah.
I think what you could do, Art, is if you are the author of a particular one and you want to make sure that it's correct on this.
Yeah.
Right, that, John, I am the author of this one and it should be reflected
Well,
this way.
let's
I mean,
start with your
yeah, you're welcome to come look at the changes. I mean, I can tell you right now, the changes I found were, I mean, do you want me to read through these?
No.
I'd like to see it.
Okay.
We trust.
Are we good?
The last thing I'll just say is that in our previous work, and it's not to say this was the best or only way to do it, we had members of the committee kind of sort of centralizing all the different financial inputs that we had. So we had stuff coming in from Nagel Hartrade, Gilbane, we had Green Report, HLS, we had financial model, and they were at various times kind of conflated into one sort of lens. And we've lost, I think, several of the people who kind of did that work to the board. So I think maybe for next time, we want to have a discussion with our
We'll put it on the
finance
agenda for
colleagues.
next-
I see Dan and Mark are here, Brian's not here, but we should put it on the agenda, a discussion for how do we want to synthesize and make those numbers. And you are here, back in the eminent row back there. I would say we need to have a discussion about how do we want to synthesize and who wants to do that to make this information sort of consumable by our committee, rather than having a disparate sort of sources and sort of piles of information. So
let's put that on the agenda for next meeting. So centralizing our sort of finance knowledge.
So not just the model. So Dan, I don't know, you're looking at me like I'm a chemistry set. I'm not sure.
I'm trying to understand exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Recreating that or black spreadsheet.
I think it's
not
understanding the spirit of what the Adam Kornblatt spreadsheet, sounds very grand, was doing, which was kind of like creating lines for all these different inputs, so you kind of see a vertical view for each of the configurations. So I think we probably need to ask the group of folks in the committee who would like to step up for that. Either it's our finance committee plus other people. How do we want to have a view of this very important pillar? So we spent a lot of time talking about how to
Could John Fuhrer
represent
do that?
education. I don't know. Education and community input. We sort of synthesize those things. We haven't done that with finance. I think we just want to acknowledge that. Make sense?
So I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
I just have, did finance mean what it would cost to build, or finance mean what it would cost to operate?
I think
We're going to pull those together. I think that's the challenge.
that's.
I think it's
but the one he's talking about
having
now.
someone with a sort of responsive understanding of all the moving parts.
Yes.
But
So-
to Darren's point, you can't look at just how much something costs, you also have to look at how much it's.
Correct. And also what questions we're going to need to answer down the road in the process.
There are significant judgments required. So I guess the point was, we don't have a consensus understanding of how we're going to do that. So I think we should need to develop that. Maybe you already have it in your mind.
No, I mean, Mark and I talked to Ann and Brian talked to Chris and Monica this week, and there are some real challenges in terms of figuring out sustainability, beyond your broad ranges. And that gets to the point that Ronnie made just a few minutes ago about the staffing model, right? If you imagine like the assumption we've made all along when we did our model, for example, is we assumed the first elementary school you close, you save $2.7 million. Well, that's only the case if you have the BDR3 class sizes, if you're willing to like maximize and split neighborhoods and things like that. If you're just talking about closing an elementary school and shifting all the kids to another, you're not going to save that, and so you get very misleading, results. Now, you could say, well, is this information knowable or not? It's certainly knowable, but it takes a lot of work to develop that information.
Can I confirm or understanding?
Yeah.
But it's also how you describe it and how you present it.
Right.
And I think what I'm saying is not that we're not doing any of those things, but more, I think it makes sense based on several people's different comments to bring it to the sort of the full group of how are we going to do that? What's the best way to do it? Sort of agree on that.
that's what we're thinking conceptually, but it's not gonna be, it's likely to be some sort of a range, in terms of, at least to the operating side. But you're right in terms of how does the operating work with the capital? I mean, we have some savings. We've found out that there's savings, from HVAC. If you're gonna put HVAC in, you're gonna cut some of your green costs. You can't both reduce the size of the referendum and make the operations more sustainable. We have to integrate that in some way. We haven't figured that out yet.
So it's a good, so it's just continuing the good discipline we've had of being clear and explaining the assumptions we're making, being very transparent about it.
Right, I'm just not sure in terms of what we need to communicate to the community when we go out to forums. I mean, we want people to know, is more or less sustainable generally, but we don't want to overpromise and give them something that's not going to turn out to be true. What we really want to avoid is saying, we built this assumption in, or we built some assumptions that turn out to be not true later on, and that therefore we've overstated something.
And we also need, even among ourselves, before we get to the community, we need to have a common parlance among ourselves about what that is. And when we communicate a number, what is it, what's internal to it, what's certain, what's not certain, all that stuff, so.
Seems like we can mitigate some of this by giving ranges.
I think it's ranges is the answer.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, any other items, or can I get a motion to adjourn?
When do we need that?
Monday.
Monday.
We can meet sooner if you want to.
I'm shocked that nobody's moved to adjourn this meeting yet.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor? Put a fork in it, we're done.